Oh dear, dear, dear. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh my goodness. I am so, so sorry. A little bit embarrassing there. Anyway, hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Greetings, konnichiwa, and every form of welcome across this multiverse. I'll say it again. I'm Matsu Quinox. Welcome back to the study. Interdimensional Omniversal Librarian at your service. It's wonderful to see you all here. Firefly, it's wonderful to see you. Dr. Zadium, wonderful to see you too. MJD, welcome back. And Solar Coast, welcome to the study. And thank you so much for the following. It's wonderful to have you as part of our scholarly group. Is everyone doing well tonight? Or morning? I know some people may be from other locations across this globe, and I want to be fair to them as well. Oh, you've seen Horace. Yes, Horace is my precious assistant. He's wonderful, helps me all around the library as much as I can, keeps me company. Your MJD, your flesh cries for power, but you have none. I'm not sure whether I should be frightened or impressed by that. Well, I'm glad to hear you're hanging in there all right, Silicos. I'm pronouncing that right, right? What? Not Artasujo. Am I pronouncing that right? Artasujo? I'm not sure. Well, I don't know about whoever that is, but Horace here is just wonderful. And I must give credit to Satsuma who designed him. She did a wonderful job, wonderful artist. I really think all her work is marvelous. Well, I'm good. It would be terrible for a person such as myself to get pronunciation wrong. Not that I haven't done it in the past, mind you, but we all have our little flaws. So, since the last time I streamed, if you were there, you probably could tell how stressful it became. So I thought tonight we would like relax a little bit and maybe return to some book reading. I was I was looking through what I have in my library, and I have quite a few tales of mystery. And I'm sure all of you love a mystery, right? I mean, come on, who doesn't love a mystery? But so of course I thought, well, if we're gonna read a mystery, I might as well read one of the most famous detectives. I can't stress there are a marvelous amount of detectives out there, all sorts. But this one probably is the one that most people remember when they think about it. So I thought we might read some Sherlock Holmes tonight. Now, before I even begin, I am well aware about the little thing about Sherlock Holmes is there is some questions on rights and copyright stuff, so I was very careful in choosing stories that are within the public domain. Um, um, no, speaking of mysteries, have you seen the new Death on the Nile yet? I have not. Is it out at the moment? I wasn't aware that it was out yet. Of course, do interdimensional libraries watch movies? Of course, I watch movies. A library is more than just books. They're film and newspapers and everything you could imagine. Ah, no, I have not seen it yet. It is on my to-do list. I have seen the version that David Chusset did for television, and I have read the book. And I am hoping that the movie sticks fairly close to the spirit of the original, especially in regards to some characters and the ending. The ending to the original book is marvelous. In fact, I'm gonna make a book. I'm gonna I'm gonna make a recommendation to all you scholars out there who are watching. If you've never read Death on the Nile, I highly suggest you do so. It is a wonderful mystery book, wonderful story, one of Agatha Christie's best. Um, so, sh- I was thinking, shall we begin our journey into mystery? Not the comic book, but I mean, you know what I mean. Well, if you are all ready, my scholars, well, I would suggest you sit back, relax, close your eyes if you want, have a nice cup of tea. Also, if you wish, you may take part in the mystery. I might, I'm not saying I will 100% do it. I might forget, knowing me. I might stop just before the climax of the mystery occurs and ask you, do you know who did it? So, tonight's first mystery that we will be reading from is from the first collection of short stories of Sherlock Holmes, the ones that came out just after the second book that was written. Conan Doyle wrote two books before he wrote the short stories. The two books before were, um, oh my goodness, I am blanking. Oh, A Study in Scarlet and The Sign of Four. And these short stories came out after that. Most of them came out in the magazine called The Stand. If you've ever seen any films set during the Victoria era and they mention The Stand, that's why they mention it. And for that, because of that, I should just let me get my bearings back. Thank you. Um, so I suggest maybe we should begin. So as I was saying before, sit back, relax, have yourself a cup of tea if you can, or a hot drink. That's nice too. And tonight's first story from the pages of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is The Adventure of the Red-Headed League. I had called upon my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, one day in the autumn of last year, and found him in deep conversation with a very stout, florid-faced, elderly gentleman, with fiery red hair. With an apology for my intrusion, I was about to withdraw, when Holmes pulled me abruptly into the room, and closed the door behind me. "You could not possibly have come at a better time, my dear Watson," he said cordially. "I was afraid that you were engaged." "So I am. Very much so." "Then I can wait in the next room." "Not at all. This gentleman, Mr. Wilson, has been my partner and helper in many of my most successful cases, and I have no doubt that he will be of the utmost use to me in yours also." The stout gentleman half rose from his chair, and gave a bob of greeting, with a quick little questioning glance from his small, fat encircled eyes. Rude. "Try the settee," said Holmes, relapsing into his armchair, and putting his fingertips together, as was his custom when in judicial mood. So before the Gendo pose, it was the Holmes pose then? Hmm, didn't know that. I've heard that the new DOTN is actually decent. What's DOTN? Oh, Death on the Nile. Oh, well that's good. That's good. That makes me want to see it even more. Oh, good, good. I'm glad your mom enjoyed it, Firefly. I know, my dear Watson, that you share my love of all that is bizarre and outside the conventions and humdrum routine of everyday life. You have shown your relish for it by the enthusiasm with which has prompted you to chronicle, and if you will excuse my saying so, somewhat to embellish so many of my own little adventures. Your cases have indeed been of the greatest interest to me, I observed. You will remember that I remarked the other day, just before we went to the very simple problem presented by Miss Mary Sutherland, that for strange effects and extraordinary combinations we must go to life itself, which is always far more daring than any effort of the imagination. A proposition which I took the liberty of doubting. You did, Doctor, but none the less you must come round to my view, for otherwise I shall keep on piling fact upon fact on you, until your reason breaks down under them and acknowledges me to be right. Now, Mr. Jabez Wilson here has been good enough to call upon me this morning, and to begin a narrative which promises to be one of the most singular which I have listened to for some time. You have heard me remark that the strangest and most unique cases. Excuse me a moment, folks. Sorry about that, scholars. I'm back. I look like Holmes, but I feel like Columbo. Was he done in with a lead pipe in the stomach? We haven't even started the mystery, Zadium. We don't know yet what's happened. Let me see, where was I? You have heard me remark that the strangest and most unique things are very often connected, not with the larger, but with the smaller crimes, and occasionally, indeed, where there is room for doubt whether any positive crime has been committed. As far as I have heard it, yeah. As far as I have heard it. Excuse me a second. Trying to get my bearings again. As far as I have heard it, it is impossible for me to say whether the present case is an instance of crime or not. But the course of events is certainly among the most singular that I have ever listened to. Perhaps, Mr. Wilson, you would have the great kindness to recommence your narrative. I ask you not merely because my friend Dr. Watson has not heard the opening part, but also because the particular nature of the story makes me anxious to have every possible detail from your lips. And as a rule, when I have heard some slight indication of the course of events, I am able to guide myself by the thousands of other similar cases which occurred to my memory. In the present instance, I am forced to admit that the facts are, to the best of my belief, unique. The portly client puffed out his chest with an appearance of some little pride, and pulled a dirty and wrinkled newspaper from the inside pocket of his greatcoat. As he glanced down the advertisement column, with his head thrust forward and the paper flattened out upon his knee, I took a good look at the man, and endeavored, after the fashion of my companion, to read the indications which might be presented by his dress or appearance. Well, I will admit, I have never played Clue. I know, scandalous. I know. It just never happened for me. Firefly. I did not gain very much, however, by my inspection. Our visitor bore every mark of being an average commonplace British tradesman, obese, pompous, and slow. So, wait, that's what a common British tradesman was like. Oh, jeez. Oh my. Not a lot to go on there. He wore rather baggy grey shepherd's check trousers, a not over clean black frock coat unbuttoned in the front, and a drab waistcoat with a heavy brassy Albert chain, and a square-pieced bit of metal dangling down as an ornament. A frayed top hat and a faded brown overcoat with a wrinkled velvet collar lay upon a chair beside him. Altogether, look as I would, there was nothing remarkable about the man, save his blazing red head, and the expression of extreme chagrin and discontent upon his features. Sherlock Holmes' quick eye took in my occupation, and he shook his head with a smile as he noticed my questioning glance. Beyond the obvious fact that he has at some time done manual labor, that he takes snuff, that he is a Freemason, that he has been in China, and that he has done a considerable amount of writing lately, I can deduce nothing else. Mr. Jabez Wilson started up in his chair, with his forefinger upon the paper, but his eyes upon my companion. "How in the name of good fortune did you know all that, Mr. Holmes?" he asked. "How did you know, for example, that I did manual labor? It's as true as gospel, and I began as a ship's carpenter." "Your hands, my dear sir. Your right hand is quite a size larger than your left. You have worked with it, and the muscles are more developed." Oh yes, I know Clue is a classic Solar Coast. I just never have played it. Shame, really. "Well, the snuff then, and the Freemasonry. I won't insult your intelligence by telling you how I read that, especially as, rather against the strict rules of your order, you use an arc and compass breastpin." "Ah, of course, I forgot that. But the writing? What else can be indicated by that right cuff so very shiny for 5 inches, and the left one with a smooth patch near the elbow, where you rested upon the desk?" Oh, the movie was funny. Oh, hello, Private Maverick. Welcome. Hello. Oh yes, yes, I have seen the movie. I have seen the movie. It is wonderful. Again, if no one has seen the movie Clue, highly recommend it. It is hilarious. It's worth a watch. "Well, but China. The fish you have tattooed immediately above your right wrist could only have been done in China. I have made a small study of tattoo marks, and have even contributed to the literature of the subject. That trick of staining the fish's scales of a delicate pink is quite peculiar to China. When in addition I see a Chinese coin hanging from your watch chain, the matter becomes even more simple. I do have to wonder, why couldn't Watson tell that the coin on the chain was a Chinese coin? I mean, we do know from other stories that Watson has traveled. He was at least in Afghanistan during the war back then. So how is it that he doesn't know what a Chinese coin looks like? That kind of bothers me a little bit. I prefer to watch the movie. I tend to be not competitive with games at all. Yes, I'm not. Well, no, I am somewhat competitive with games. Firefly, I'm terribly competitive sometimes. Um, Private Maverick, maybe he went the route of the Silk Road. Well, the Silk Road actually didn't exist at that point, but I'm not sure about the answer. I'm just guessing they just wanted Watson not to know. Mr. Jabez Wilson laughed heavily. "Well, I never," said he. "I thought at first that you had done something clever, but I see that there was nothing in it at all, after all." "I begin to think, Watson," said Holmes, "that I make a mistake in explaining om igno... My Latin is terrible. Sorry, folks. Om ignotum pro magnifico, you know, and my poor little reputation, such as it is, will suffer shipwreck if I am so candid. Can you not find the advertisement, Mr. Wilson?" "Yes, I've got it now," he answered with his thick red finger planted halfway down the column. "Here it is. This is what began it all. You just read it for yourself, sir." I took the paper from him and read as follows: Firefly, Watson is more of a common person than Holmes. He's a companion here, so maybe he hasn't seen one. That's actually that's probably very much true. That's very much true. I was just wondering, really, but that does make a lot of sense. Or that particular style, yes, yeah, it might be an old coin, so he might not recognize something like that at the time. To the Red-Headed League, on account of the request of the late Ezekiel Hopkins of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, USA. There is now another vacancy open which entitles a member of the League to a salary of £4 a week for purely nominal services. All red-headed men who are sound in body and mind and above the age of 21 years are eligible. Apply in person on Monday at 11 o'clock to Duncan Ross at the offices of the League, 7 Pope's Corner, Court, Fleet Street. Firefly, oh, LOL, that's not far from. Oh, it's not far from there? Oh, interesting. Oh, that's really interesting, Firefly. What on earth does this mean? Uh, 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 um, so folks, this story was written in the 19th, well, written in the late 19th century, early 20th century. There are certain words back then which meant something different in use than they do now. For the sake of avoiding childish jokes in the chat, I am going to skip that word. For, I apologize, but I am not going to say this word out loud. Fleet Street, as in Sweeney Todd's old stomping grounds. Solar Coast, yes, it is the same area. Fleet Street was a famous, it was a street in London. I don't know much about it other than those references, so there you are. Oh, it's less than 2 hours away, Firefly. Interesting. I mean, yeah. What on earth does this mean? Does this mean I, after I had twice read over the extraordinary announcements, Holmes chuckled and wriggled in his chair, as was his habit when in high spirits. "It's a little off the beaten track, isn't it?" said he. "And now, Mr. Wilson, off you go at scratch, and tell us all about yourself, your household, and the effect which this advertisement has had upon your fortunes. You will first make a note, Doctor, of the paper and the date." "It is the Morning Chronicle of April 27th, 1890, just 2 months ago." "Very good. Now, Mr. Wilson." "Well, it is just as I have been telling you, Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said Jabez Wilson, mopping his forehead. "I have a small pawnbroker's business in Coburg Square, near the city. It's not a very large affair, and of late years it has not done more than just giving me a living. I used to be able to keep 2 assistants, but now I only keep one, and I would have a job to pay him, but that he is willing to come for half wages so as to learn the business." "What is the name of this obliging youth?" asked Sherlock Holmes. "His name is Vincent Spaulding, and he's not such a youth either. It's hard to say his age. I should not wish a smarter assistant, Mr. Holmes, and I know very well that he could better himself and earn twice what I am able to give him. But after all, if he is satisfied, why should I put ideas in his head?" "Why, indeed? You seem most fortunate in having an employee who comes under the full market price. It is not a common experience among employers in this age. I don't know that your assistant is not as remarkable as her advertisement." He has his faults too," said Mr. Wilson. "Never was such a fellow for photography. Snapping away with a camera." "Oh, well, it was wonderful to have you here, Solar Coast. Thank you for coming. You take care, and you're always welcome to come back to the study any time." "Never was such a fellow for photography, snapping away with a camera when he ought to be improving his mind, then diving down into the cellar like a rabbit into its hole to develop his pictures. That is his main fault, but on the whole he's a good worker. There's no vice in him." "He is still with you, I presume?" "Yes, sir. He and a girl of 14 who does a bit of simple cooking and keeps the place clean. That's all I have in the house, for I'm a widower and never had any family. We live very quietly, sir, the three of us, and we keep a roof over our heads and pay our debts if we do nothing more. Private Maverick, Mr. Wilson, watch out for that dentist kid. It would certainly liven up this story, that's for certain. The first thing that put us out was that advertisement. Spaulding, he came down to the office, just this day, 8 weeks, with this very paper in his hand, and he says, "I wish to the Lord, Mr. Wilson, that I was a red-headed man." "What's that?" I asks. "Why," says he, "here's another vacancy on the League of Red-Headed Men. It's worth quite a little fortune to any man who gets it, and I understand that there are more vacancies than there are men, so that the trustees are at their wits' end what to do with the money. If my hair would only change colour, here's a nice little crib all ready for me to step into." Excuse me. Goodness. "Why, what is it then?" I asked. "You see, Mr. Holmes, I'm a very stay-at-home man, and as my business came to me instead of my having to go to it, I was often weeks on end without putting my foot over the door mat, and that way I didn't know much of what was going on outside, and I was always glad of a bit of news." "Have you never heard of the League of the Red-Headed Men?" he asked with his eyes open. "Never." "Why, I wonder at that, for you are eligible yourself for one of the vacancies." "And what are they worth?" I asked. "Oh, merely a couple of hundred a year, but the work is slight, and it need not interfere very much with one's other occupations." Well, you can easily think that made me prick my ears, for the business has not been over good for some years, and an extra couple of hundred would have been very handy. Tell me all about it," said. "Tell me all about it," said I. "Well," said he, showing me the advertisement, "you can see for yourself that the league has a vacancy, and there is the address where you should apply for particulars. As far as I can make out, the league was founded by an American millionaire, Ezekiel Hopkins, who was very peculiar in his ways. He was himself red-headed, and he had a great sympathy for all red-headed men, so when he died, he was found that he had left his enormous fortune in the hands of trustees, with instructions to apply the interest to the providing of easy berths to men whose hair is of that colour. From all I hear, it is splendid pay, and very little to do." "But," said I, "there would be millions of red-headed men who would apply." "Not so many as you might think," he answered. "You see, it is really confined to Londoners, and to grown men. This American had started from London when he was young, and he wanted to do the old town a good turn. Then again, I have heard it is of no use your applying if your hair is light red or dark red, or anything but real bright, blazing, fiery red. Now, if you care to apply, Mr. Wilson, you would just walk in, but perhaps it would hardly be worth your while to put yourself out of the way for the sake of a few £100. Now it is a fact, gentlemen, as you may see for yourself, that my hair is of a very full and rich tint, so that it seemed to me that if there was to be any competition in the matter, I stood as good a chance as any man that I ever met." Discriminating redheads. Apparently so. Firefly, apparently so. Vincent Spaulding seemed to know so much about it that I thought he might prove useful, so I just ordered him to put up the shutters for the day, and to come right away with me. He was very willing to have a holiday, so we shut the business up and started off for the address that was given us in the advertisements. I never hope to see such a sight as that again, Mr. Holmes. From north, south, east, and west, every man who had a shade of red in his hair had travelled into the city to answer the advertisement. Fleet Street was choked with red-headed folk, and Pope's Court looked like a coster's orange barrow. I should not have thought there were so many in the whole country as were brought together by that single advertisement. Every shade of colour there were: straw, lemon, orange, brick, Irish setter, liver, clay. But, as Spaulding said, there were not many who had the real vivid flame-coloured tint. When I saw how many were waiting, I would have given it up in despair. but Spaulding would not hear of it. How he did it I could not imagine, but he pushed and pulled and butted until he got me through the crowd, right up to the steps which led to the office. There was a double stream upon the stair, some going up in hope, and some coming back dejected, but we wedged in as well as we could, and soon found ourselves in the office. As you can tell, this accent is very hard for me to do. Your experience, your experience has been a most entertaining one, remarked Holmes, as his client paused and refreshed his memory with a huge pinch of snuff. Pray continue your very interesting statement. There was nothing in the office but a couple of wooden chairs and a deal table, behind which sat a small man with a head that was even redder than mine. He said a few words to each candidate as he came up, and then he always managed to find some fault in them which would disqualify them. Getting a vacancy did not seem to be such an easy matter after all. However, when our turn came, the little man was much more favourable to me than to any of the others, and he closed the door as we entered, so that he might have a private word with us. "This is Mr. Jabez Wilson," said my assistant, "and he is willing to fill a vacancy in the League." "And he is admirably suited for it," the other answered. "He has every requirement. I cannot recall when I have seen anything so fine." He took a step backward, cocked his head on one side, and gazed at my hair, till I felt quite bashful. Then suddenly he plunged forward, wrung my hand, and congratulated me warmly on my success. "It would be an injustice to hesitate," said he. "You will, however, I am sure, excuse me for taking an obvious precaution." With that, he seized my hair in both my hands, and tugged until I yelled with the pain. "There is water in your eyes," said he, as he released me. "I perceive that all is as it should be. But we have to be careful, for we have twice been deceived by wigs, and once by paint. I could tell you tales of cobbler's wax which would disgust you with human nature." He stepped over to the window and shouted through it at the top of his voice that the vacancy was filled. A groan of disappointment came up from below, and the folk all trooped away in their different directions until there was not a red head to be seen except my own and that of the manager. Excuse me. "My name," said he, "is Mr. Duncan Ross, and I am myself one of the pensioners upon the fund left by our noble benefactor. Are you a married man, Mr. Wilson? Have you a family?" I answered that I had not. His face fell immediately. "Dear me," he said gravely, "that is very serious indeed. I am sorry to hear you say that. That fund was of course for the propagation and spread of the redheads, as well as for their maintenance." That is such a weird way to put it. "It is exceedingly unfortunate that you should be a bachelor." My face lengthened at this, Mr. Holmes, for I thought that I was not to have the vacancy after all. But after thinking it over for a few minutes, he said that it would be all right. "In the case of another," said he, "the objection might be fatal, but we must stretch a point in favour of a man with such a head of hair as yours. When shall you be able to enter upon your new duties?" "Well, it is a little awkward, for I have a business already," said I. "Oh, never mind about that, Mr. Wilson," said Vincent Spaulding. "I shall be able to look after that for you." "What would be the hours?" I asked. 10 to 2. Now, a pawnbroker's business is mostly done of an evening, Mr. Holmes, especially Thursday and Friday evening, which is just before payday, so it would suit me very well to earn a little in the mornings. Besides, I knew that my assistant was a good man, and that he would see to everything that turned up." "That would suit me very well," said I, "and the pay is £4 a week, and the work is purely nominal." "What do you call purely nominal?" "Well, you have to be in the office, or at least the building, the whole time. If you leave, you forfeit your whole pinch position forever. Sounds a little bit odd there. I mean, why would you lose your position if you happen to leave the office? I mean, what if you had to go on an errand or something, or an emergency? Strange. The will is very clear upon that point. You don't comply with the conditions if you budge from the office during that time. It's only 4 hours a day. I should not think of leaving, said I. No excuses will avail. Where was I? Said Mr. Duncan Ross. Neither sickness, nor business, nor anything else. Private Maverick, it is the British way. Yes. Yes, it is, apparently. No excuse will avail, said Mr. Duncan Ross. Neither sickness, nor business, nor anything else. There you must stay, or you lose your billet. And the work is to copy out the Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay, interesting. There is the first volume of it in that press. You must find your own ink, pens, and blotting paper. But we provide the table and chair. Will you be ready tomorrow? Certainly, I answered. Then goodbye, Mr. Jabez Wilson, and let me congratulate you once more on the important position which you have been fortunate enough to gain. He bowed me out of the room, and I went home with my assistant, hardly knowing what to say or do. I was so pleased at my own good fortune. Well, I thought over the matter all day, and by evening I was in low spirits again, for I had quite persuaded myself that the whole affair must be some great hoax or fraud. I, I would feel the same way as him, to be honest. Though what its object might be, I could not imagine. It seemed altogether past belief that anyone could make such a will, or that there would be pay such a sum for doing anything so simple as copying out the Encyclopedia Britannica. Vincent Spaulding did what he could to cheer me up, but by bedtime I had reasoned myself out of the whole thing. However, in the morning, I determined to have a look at it anyhow, so I bought a penny bottle of ink, and with a quill pen and 7 sheets of foolscap paper, I started off for Pope's Court. Well, to my surprise and delight, everything was as right as possible. The table was set out ready for me, and Mr. Duncan Ross was there to see that I had got fairly to work. He started me off upon the letter A, and then he left me, but he would drop in from time to time to see that all was right with me. At 2 o'clock he bade me good day, complimented me upon the amount that I had written, and locked the door of the office after me. This went on for day after day, Mr. Holmes, and on Saturday the manager came in and planked down 4 golden sovereigns for my week's work. It was the same next week, and the same the week after. Every morning I was there at 10, and every afternoon I left at 2. By degrees, Mr. Duncan Ross took to coming in only once of a morning, and then after a time he did not come in at all. Still, of course, I never dared to leave the room for an instant, for I was not sure when he might come, and the billet was such a good one, and suited me so well, that I would not risk the loss of it. 8 weeks passed away like this, and I had written about abbots, and archery, and armour, and architecture, and Attica, and hoped with diligence that I might get on to the bees before very long. It cost me something in foolscap, and I pretty nearly fell to shelf with my writings. And then suddenly the whole business came to an end. To an end? Yes, sir, and no later than this morning. I went to my work as usual at 10 o'clock. But the door was shut and locked, with a little square of cardboard hammered on to the middle of the panel with a tack. Here it is. You can read it for yourself. He held up a piece of white cardboard about the size of a sheet of notepaper. It read in this fashion: The Red-Headed League is dissolved. October 9th, 1890. Sherlock Holmes and I surveyed this curt announcement, and the ruthful face behind it. until the comical side of the affair so completely overtopped every other consideration that we both burst out into a roar of laughter. "I cannot see that there is anything very funny," cried our client, flushing up to the roots of his flaming head. "If you can do nothing better than laugh at me, I can go elsewhere." "No, no," cried Holmes, shoving him back into the chair from which he had half risen. "I really wouldn't miss your case for the world. It is most refreshingly unusual, but there is, if you'll excuse my saying so, something just as little funny about it. Pray, what steps did you take when you found the card upon the door?" "I was staggered, sir. I did not know what to do. Then I called up the officers round, but none of them seemed to know anything about it. Finally, I went to the landlord, who is an accountant living on the ground floor, and I asked him if he could tell me what had become of the Red-Headed League. He said that he had never heard of any such body. Then I asked him who Mr. Duncan Ross was. He answered that the name was new to him. 'Well,' said I, 'the gentleman at number 4. "'What, the red-headed man?' "'Yes.' "'Oh,' said he, 'his name was William Morris. He was a solicitor and was using my room as a temporary convenience until his new premises were ready. He moved out yesterday.' "'Where can I find him?' "'Oh, at his new offices. He did tell me the address. Yes, 17 King Edward Street, near St. Paul's.' "I started off, Mr. Holmes, but when I got to that address, it was a manuf- no, excuse me. When I got to that address, it was a manufactory of artificial kneecaps, and no one in it had ever heard of either Mr. William Morris or Mr. Duncan Ross." "And what did you do then?" asked Holmes. "I went home to sack Coburg Square. I took the advice of my assistant, but he could not help me in any way. He could only say that if I waited I should hear by post. But that was not quite good enough, Mr. Holmes. I did not wish to lose such a place without a struggle. So as I had heard that you were good enough to give advice to poor folk who were in need of it, I came right away to you." "And you did very wisely," said Holmes. "Your case is an exceedingly remarkable one, and I shall be happy to look into it. From what you might have told me, I think that is possible that graver issues hang from it than might at first sight appear. "Grave enough," said Mr. Jabez Wilson. "Why, I have lost £4 a week." "And as far as you have personally concerned," remarked Holmes, "I do not see that you have any grievance against this extraordinary league. On the contrary, you are, as I understand, richer by some £30, to say nothing of the minute knowledge which you have gained on every subject which comes under the letter A. You have lost nothing by them." "No, sir, but I want to find out about them, and who they are, and what their object was in playing this prank. If it was a prank upon me, it was a pretty expensive joke for them, for it cost them £32. "We shall endeavour to clear up these points for you. And first, one or two questions, Mr. Wilson. This assistant of yours, who first called your attention to the advertisement, how long had he been with you?" "About a month, then." "How did he come?" "In answer to an advertisement." "Was he the only applicant?" "No, I had a dozen." "Why did you pick him?" "Because he was handy, and would come cheap." "At half wages, in fact?" "Yes." "What is he like, this Vincent Spaulding?" "Small, stout build, very quick in his ways, no hair on his face, though he's not short of 30, has a white splash of acid upon his forehead." Holmes sat up in his chair in considerable excitement. "I thought as much," said he. "Have you ever observed that his ears are pierced for earrings?" "Yes, sir. He told me that a gypsy had done it for him when he was a lad." "Hm," said Holmes, sinking back in deep thought. "He is still with you?" "He is still with you." "Oh, yes, sir. I have only just left him." "And has your business been attended to in your absence?" "Oh, nothing to complain of, sir. There's never very much to do of a morning." "That will do, Mr. Wilson. I shall be happy to give you an opinion upon the subject in the course of a day or two. Today is Saturday, and I hope that by Monday we may come to a conclusion." "Well, Watson," said Holmes when our visitor had left us, "what do you make of it all?" "I make nothing of it," I answered frankly. "It is a most mysterious business." "As a rule," said Holmes, "the more bizarre a thing is the least mysterious. The more bizarre a thing is, the less mysterious it proves to be. It is your commonplace, featureless crimes which are really puzzling, just as a commonplace face is the most difficult to identify. But I must be prompt over this matter." "What are you going to do, then?" I asked. "Oh, to smoke," he answered. "It is quite a three-pipe problem, and I beg that you won't speak to me for 50 minutes." He curled himself up in his chair, with his thin knees drawn up to his hawk-like nose, and there he sat with his eyes closed, and his black clay pipe thrusting out like the bill of some strange bird. I had come to the conclusion that he had dropped asleep, and indeed was nodding myself, when he suddenly sprang out of his chair with the gesture of a man who had made up his mind, and put his pipe down upon the mantelpiece. "Somerset plays at the St. James Hall this afternoon," he remarked. "What do you think, Watson? Could your patience spare you for a few hours?" "I have nothing to do today. My practice is never very absorbing." "Then put on your hat, and come. I'm going through the city first, and we can have some lunch on the way. I observe that there is a good deal of German music on the program, which is rather more to my taste than Italian or French. It is introspective, and I want to introspect. Come along." We traveled by the underground as far as Aldersgate. Yeah, apparently they did have subway trains back then. Interesting, huh? And a short walk took us to Saxe Coburg Square, the scene of the singular story which we had listened to in the morning. It was a poky little shabby genteel place, where 4 lines of dingy two-storied brick houses looked out into a small railed-in enclosure, where a lawn of weedy grass and a few clumps of faded laurel bushes made a hard fight against a smoke-laden and uncongealed atmosphere. 3 gilt balls and a brown board with "Jabez Wilson" in white letters upon a cornerstone announced the place where our red-headed client carried on his business. Sherlock Holmes stopped in front of it with his head on one side, and looked it all over, with his eyes shining brightly between puckered lids. Then he walked slowly up the street and then down again to the corner, still looking keenly at the houses. Finally he returned to the pawnbroker's, and having thumped vigorously upon the pavement with his stick 2 or 3 times, he went up to the door and knocked. It was instantly opened by a bright-looking, clean-shaven young fellow, who asked him to step in. "Thank you," said Holmes. "I only wished to ask you how you would go from here to the Strand." Ha ha! That's hilarious. Little in-joke reference there. For those who missed it, The Strand is the magazine that Sherlock Holmes was published in at the time. "Third right, fourth left," answered the assistant promptly, closing the door. "A smart fellow, that," observed Holmes as we walked away. "He is, in my judgment, the fourth smartest man in London, and for daring I am not sure that he has not a claim to be third. I have known something of him before." "Evidently," said I, "Mr. Wilson's assistant counts for a good deal in this mystery of the Red-Headed League. I'm sure you inquired your way merely in order that you might see him. Oh, not him. What then? The knees of his trousers. And what did you see? What I expected to see. Why did you beat the pavement? My dear doctor, this is a time for observance, not for talk. We are spies in an enemy's country. We know something of Saxe Coburg Square. Let us now explore the parts which lie behind it. The road in which we found ourselves as we turned round the corner from the retired Saxe Coburg Square presented as great a contrast to it as the front of a picture does to the back. It was one of the main arteries which conveyed the traffic of the city to the north and west. The roadway was blocked with the immense stream of commerce flowing in a double tide inward and outward, while the footpaths were black with the hurrying swarms of pedestrians. It was difficult to realize. Where was I? It was difficult to realize, as we looked at the line of fine shops and stately business premises, that they really abutted on the other side upon the faded and stagnant square which we had just quitted. Let me see, said Holmes, standing at the corner and glancing along the line. I should like just to remember the order of the houses here. It is a hobby of mine to have an exact knowledge of London. There's Mortimer's, the tobacconist, the little newspaper shop, the Coburg branch of the City and Suburban Bank, the vegetarian restaurant, and McFarlane's carriage building depot. That carries right on to the other block. And now, Doctor, we've done our work, so it's time we had some play. A sandwich and a cup of coffee, and then off to Violin Land, where all is sweetness and delicacy and harmony, and there are no red-headed clients to vex us with their conundrums. Okay, I like that sentence. That's a great little sentence there. My friend was an enthusiastic musician, being himself not only a very capable performer, but a composer of no ordinary merit. All the afternoon he sat in the stalls, wrapped in the most perfect happiness, gently waving his long, thin fingers in time to the music, while his gently smiling face and his languid, dreamy eyes were as unlike those of Holmes the sleuth hound, Holmes the relentless, keen-witted, ready-handed criminal agent, as it was possible to conceive. In his singular character the dual nature alternately asserted itself, and his extreme exactness and astuteness represented, as I have often thought, the reaction against the poetic and contemplative mood which occasionally predominated in him. The swing of his nature took him from extreme languor to devouring energy, and as I knew well, he was never so truly formidable as when for days on end he had been lounging in his armchair amid his improvisations and his black-letter editions. Then it was that the lust of the chase would suddenly come upon him, and that his brilliant reasoning power would rise to the level of intuition, until those who were unacquainted with his methods, were unacquainted with, let me go back a little bit, till those who were unacquainted with his methods would look aghast at him as on a man whose knowledge was not that of other mortals. When I saw him that afternoon so enwrapped in the music at St. James's Hall, I felt that an evil time might be coming upon those whom set himself to hunt down. He had set himself to hunt down. You want to go home, no doubt, Doctor, he remarked as we emerged. Yes, it would be as well, and I have some business to do which will take some hours. This business at Coburg Square is serious. Why serious? A considerable crime is in contemplation. I have every reason to believe that we shall be in time to stop it. But today being Saturday rather complicates matters. I shall want your help tonight. At what time? 10 will be early enough. I shall be at Baker Street at 10. Very well. And I say, Doctor, there may be some little danger, so kindly put your army revolver in your pocket. He waved his hand, turned on his heel, and disappeared in an instant among the crowd. I trust that I am not more dense than my neighbors, but I have always oppressed with a sense of my own stupidity in my dealings with Sherlock Holmes. I was always oppressed with a sense of my own stupidity in my dealings with Sherlock Holmes. Here I had heard what he had heard. I had seen what he had seen, and yet from his words it was evident that he saw clearly not only what had happened, what was about to happen, while to me the whole business was still confused and grotesque. As I drove home to my house in Kensington, I thought over it all, from the extraordinary story of the red-headed copier of the encyclopedia, down to the visit to Saxe Coburn Square, and the ominous words with which he had parted from me. What was this nocturnal expedition? And why should I go armed? Where were we going? And what were we to do? I had the hint from Holmes that this smooth-faced pawnbroker's assistant was a formidable man, a man who might play a deep game. I tried to puzzle it out, but gave it up in despair, and set the matter aside until night should bring an explanation. Okay, folks, scholars, I am pausing here. Can you guess the nature of this mystery? Just what is the secret of the Red-Headed League? What is Holmes so concerned about? And what are they going into? What do you think is the answer to this mystery? Private Maverick, redheads are evil. Oh dear, oh dear. Yes, Dr. Zadium, they're not redheads at all. Ooh, interesting. So you're saying they're faking, but for what end? Why would they fake not being redheads? Why would they fake being redheads? I mean, to what end? Ah, money, money. Interesting. So you think so you think something's going on that's involving money, where they're disguising themselves as redheads? Interesting answer, Dr. Zadium. Do they need a sampling of his writing, Firefly? You mean Jabez Wilson's writing? Um, well, I don't know. What do you think? Why would they need a sampling of his writing? So these are all really interesting answers. Um, they had him copying at the Firefly. They had him copying at the stuff. I don't remember. I read it ages ago. Oh, you've read this story. Okay, okay. So you do know a little bit about it. Um, well, there's only one way to find out. Anyone else have an answer to the mystery of the Red-Headed League? Otherwise, shall we continue and find out what just is going on? I will take that. You, I got nothing, Private Maverick. Aw, Private Maverick. I'm sure that is that's just you. You are helping out just as much as you can, and I appreciate that. All right, it is time to find out just what is happening. It was 9:15 when I started from home and made my way across the park, and so through Oxford Street to Baker Street. Two hansoms were standing at the door, and as I entered the passage I heard the sound of voices from above. On entering his room I found Holmes in an animated conversation with two men, one of whom I recognized as Peter Jones, the official police agent, while the other was a long, thin, sad-faced man with a very shiny hat and oppressively impressively respectable frock coat. Hansoms as in cabs. Yes, they are referring to hansom cabs, which was a very specific form of cab that was used in the Victorian era. Often in stories at the time, they didn't use the word cab. They would just call them hansoms because they assumed the reader would know what they were speaking of. Ha! Our party is complete, said Holmes, buttoning up his pea jacket and anyway, buttoning up his pea jacket and taking his heavy hunting crop from the rack. Watson, I think you know Mr. Jones of Scotland Yard. Let me introduce you to Mr. Merryweather, who is to be our companion in tonight's adventure. We're hunting in couples again, Doctor, you see, said Jones in his consequential way. Our friend here is a wonderful man for starting a chase. All he wants is an old dog to help him to do the running down. Snicker, pea jacket. Yes, Dr. Zadium, get your childish sense of humor out in the open. It's not that kind of pea. Oh, thank you for the link, Firefly. I hope a wild goose may not prove to be the end of our chase, observed Mr. Merryweather gloomily. You may place considerable confidence in Mr. Holmes, sir, said the police agent loftily. He has his own little methods, which are, if he won't mind me saying so, just a little too theoretical and fantastic. But he has the makings of a detective in him. It is not too much to say that once or twice, as in that business of the Sholto murder, the Sholto murder is a reference to The Sign of Four, which was the second Sherlock Holmes novel, and the Agra treasure, which is another reference that I cannot recall what it's for. He has been more nearly correct than the official force. Unless the Agra treasure is a reference to the what was it called? A Study in Scarlet, but I don't think it was. Only if you say so, Mr. Jones, it is all right, said the stranger with deference. Still, I confess that I miss my rubber. It is the first Saturday night for 7 and 20 years that I have not had my rubber. I wonder what the heck a rubber is. I think you will find, said Sherlock Holmes, that you will play for a higher stake tonight than you have ever done yet, and that the play will be more exciting for you, Mr. Merryweather. The stake be more exciting. For you, Mr. Merryweather, the stake will be some £30,000, and for you, Jones, it will be the man upon whom you wish to lay your hands. John Clay, the murderer, thief, smasher, and forger. He's a young man, Mr. Merryweather, but he is at the head of his profession, and I would rather have my bracelets on him than on any criminal in London. He is a remarkable man, is young John Clay. His grandfather was a royal duke, and he himself has been to Eton and Oxford. His brain is as cunning as his fingers. His brain is as cunning as his fingers, and though we meet signs of him at every turn, we never know where to find the man himself. He'll crack a crib in Scotland one week, and be raising money to build an orphanage in Cornwall the next. I've been on his track for years, and have never set eyes on him yet. I hope that I may have the pleasure of introducing you tonight. I've had one or two little turns also with Mr. John Clay, and I agree with you that he is at the head of his profession. It is past 10, however, and quite time that we started. If you two will take the first hansoms, Watson and I will follow in the second. Sherlock Holmes was not very communicative during the long drive, and lay back in the cab, humming the tunes which he had heard in the afternoon. He rattled through an endless labyrinth of gas-lit streets until we emerged into Farrington Street. That is such an odd sentence. Come on, Conan Doyle, you could have done a little bit better than that. Where am I? I mean, using street twice in the same sentence just sounds so clunky. We are close there now, my friend remarked, This fellow Merryweather is a bank director, and personally interested in the matter. I thought it as well to have Jones with us also. He's not a bad fellow, though an absolute imbecile in his profession. There is one positive virtue. He is as brave as a bulldog, as tenacious as a lobster, if he gets his claws upon anyone. Here we are, and there we are, there, and they are waiting for us. We had reached the same crowded thoroughfare in which we had found ourselves in the morning. Our cabs were dismissed, and following the guidance of Mr. Merryweather, we passed down a narrow passage, and through a side door, which he opened for us. Within there was a small corridor, which ended in a very massive iron gate. This also was opened, and led down a flight of winding stone steps, which terminated at another formidable gate. Mr. Merryweather stopped to light a lantern, and then conducted us down a dark, earth-smelling passage, and so, after opening a third door, into a huge vault or cellar, which was pulled all around with crates and massive boxes. "You are not very vulnerable from above," Holmes remarked as he held up the lantern and gazed about him. "Nor from below," said Mr. Merryweather, striking his stick upon the flags which lined the floor. "Why, dear me, it sounds quite hollow," he remarked, looking up in surprise. "I must really ask you to be a little more quiet," said Holmes severely. "You have already impaired the whole success of our expedition. Might I beg that you would have the goodness to sit down by one of those boxes and not to interfere?" Ooh, angry Holmes. The solemn Mr. Merryweather perched himself upon a crate, with a very injured expression upon his face, while Holmes fell upon his knees upon the floor, and with the lantern and a magnifying lens, began to examine minutely the cracks between the stones. A few seconds sufficed to satisfy him, for he sprang to his feet again, and put his glass in his pocket. "We have at least an hour before us," he remarked, "for they can hardly take any steps until the good pawnbroker is safely in bed. And they will not lose a minute, for the sooner they do their work the longer time they will have for their escape. We are at present, Doctor, as no doubt you have divined, in the cellar of the City branch of one of the principal London banks. Mr. Merryweather is the chairman of directors, and he will explain to you that there are reasons why the more daring criminals of London should take a considerable interest in this cellar at present." "It is all French gold," whispered the director. "We have had several warnings that an attempt might be made upon it." "Your French gold?" "Yes, we had occasion some months ago to strengthen our resources, and borrowed, for that purpose, 30,000 Napoleons from the Bank of France. It has become known that we have never had occasion to unpack the money, and that it is still lying in our cellar. The crate upon which I sit contained 2,000 Napoleons, packed between layers of lead foil. Our reserve of bullion is much larger at present than is usually kept in a single branch office, and the directors have had misgivings upon the subject." "Which was very well justified," observed Holmes. "And now it is time that we arrange our little plans. I expect that within an hour matters will come to a head. In the meantime, Mr. Merryweather, we must put the screen over that dark lantern." "And sit in the dark?" "I am afraid so. I had brought a pack of cards in my pocket, and I thought that as we were a, oh Lord, it's French. Hold on, I'm gonna sadly butcher this. Pate carrier. You might have your rubber after all. But I see that the enemy's preparations have gone so far that we cannot risk the presence of a light. And first of all, we must choose our positions. These are daring men, and though we shall take them at a disadvantage, they may do us some harm, unless we are careful. I shall stand behind this crate, and do you conceal yourself behind those. Then when I flash a light upon them, close in swiftly. If they fire, Watson, have no compunction about shooting them down." Wow. Holmes is getting intense here, folks. I placed my revolver, cocked, upon the top of the wooden case behind which I crouched. Holmes shot the slide across the front of his lantern and left us in pitch darkness. Such an absolute darkness as I have never before experienced. The smell of hot metal remained to assure us that the light was still there, ready to flash out at a moment's notice. To me, with my nerves worked up into a pitch of expectancy, there was something depressing and subduing in the sudden gloom, and in the cold, dank air of the vault. "They have but one retreat," whispered Holmes. "That is back through the house into Saxe Coburg Square. I hope you have done what I asked you, Jones." "I have an inspector and 2 officers waiting at the front door." "Then we have stopped all the holes, and now we must be silent and wait." What a time it seemed! From comparing notes afterwards, it was but an hour and a quarter. It appeared to me that the night must have almost gone, and the dawn be breaking above us. My limbs were weary and stiff, for I feared to change my position. Yet my nerves were worked up to the highest pitch of tension, and my hearing was so acute that I could not only hear the gentle breathing of my companions, but I could distinguish the deeper, heavier in breath of the bulky Jones from the thin, sighing note of the bank director. From my position, I could look over the case in the direction of the floor. Suddenly, my eyes caught the glint of a light. At first it was but a lurid spark upon the stone pavement. Then it lengthened out until it became a yellowed line, and then, without any warning or sound, a gash seemed to open, and a hand appeared, a white, almost womanly hand, which felt about in the center of the little area of light. For a minute or more, the hand, with its writhing fingers, protruded out of the floor. Then it was withdrawn as suddenly as it appeared, and it was dark again, save the single lurid spark which marked a chink between the stones. Its disappearance, however, was but momentary. With a rending, tearing sound, one of the broad white stones turned over upon its side, and left a square, gaping hole, through which streamed the light of a lantern. Over the edge there peeped a clear, clean-cut, boyish face, which looked keenly about it, and then, with a hand on either side of the aperture, drew itself shoulder high and waist high, until one knee rested upon the edge. In another instant it stood at the side of the hole, and was hauling after him a companion, lithe and small like himself, with a pale face and a shock of very red hair. "It's all clear," he whispered. "Have you the chisel and the bag? Great Scott! Jump, Archie, jump, and I'll swing for it." Sherlock Holmes had sprung out and seized the intruder by the collar. The other dived down the hole, and I heard the sound of rending cloth as Jones clutched at his skirts. The light flashed upon the barrel of a revolver, but Holmes' hunting crop came down on the man's wrist, and the pistol clinked upon the stone floor. "It's no use, John Clay," said Holmes blandly. "You have no chance at all." "So I see," the other answered with the utmost coolness. "I fancy that my pal is all right. I see you have got his coat-tails." "There are 3 men waiting for him at the door," said Holmes. "Oh, indeed. So you have done the thing very completely. I must compliment you." "And you," Holmes answered. "Your red-headed idea was very new and efficient." "You'll see your pal again presently," said Jones. "He's quicker at climbing down holes than I am. Just hold out while I fix the derbies." "I beg that you not touch me with your filthy hands," remarked our prisoner as the handcuffs clattered about his wrists. "You may not be aware that I have royal blood in my veins. Have the goodness also, when you address me, always to say 'sir,' and please." "All right," said Jones with a stare and a snigger. "Well, would you please, sir, march upstairs, or we might get a cab to carry your highness to the police station." "That is better," said John Clay serenely. He made a sweeping bow to the three of us, and walked quietly off in the custody of the detective. "Really, Mr. Holmes," said Mr. Merryweather as we followed them from the cellar, "I do not know how the bank can thank you or repay you. There is no doubt that you have detected and defeated in the most complete manner one of the most determined attempts at bank robbery that have ever come within my experience." "I have had one or two of little scores of my own to settle with, Mr. John Clay," said Holmes. "I have been at some small expense over this matter, which I shall expect the bank to refund." Bold there, Holmes. "But beyond that I am amply repaid by having had an experience which is in many ways unique, and by hearing the very remarkable narrative of the Red-Headed League." "You see, Watson," he explained in the early hours of the morning as we sat over a glass of whiskey and soda in Baker Street, "it was perfectly obvious from the first that the only possible object of this rather fantastic business of the advertisement of the League and the copying of the encyclopedia must be to get this not over bright pawnbroker out of the way for a number of hours every day. There's your answer, folks, or scholars. It was a curious way of managing it, but really it would be difficult to suggest a better. The method was no doubt suggested to Clay's ingenious mind by the color of his accomplice's hair. The £4 a week was a lure which must draw him, and what was it to them, who were playing for thousands? The other They put in the advertisement, one rogue has the temporary office, the other rogue incites the man to apply for it, and together they managed to secure his absence every morning in the week. From the time that I heard of the assistant having come for half wages, it was obvious to me that he had some strong motive for securing the situation, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. I mean, who would go for half wages in a job like that? But how could you guess what the motive was? Had there been a woman in the house, I should have suspected a mere vulgar intrigue. That, however, was out of the question. The man's business was a small one, and there was nothing in his house which could account for such elaborate preparations, and such an expenditure as they were at. It must then be something out of the house. What could it be? I thought of the assistant's fondness for photography, and his trick of vanishing into the cellar. The cellar! There was the end of this tangled clue. Then I made inquiries as to this mysterious assistant, and found that I had to deal with one of the coolest and most daring criminals in London. He was doing something in the cellar, something which took many hours a day for months on end. What could it be? Once more, I could think of nothing save that he was running a tunnel to some other building. So far as I had got when we went to visit the scene of action, I surprised you by beating him upon the pavement with my stick. I was asserting whether the cellar stretched out in front or behind. It was not in front. Then I rang the bell, and as I hoped, the assistant answered it. We have had some skirmishes, but we have never set eyes upon each other before. I hardly looked at his face. His knees were what I wished to see. They spoke of those hours of burrowing. Now, you must yourself have remarked how worn, wrinkled, and stained they were. They spoke of those hours of burrowing. The only remaining point was what they were burrowing for. I walked round the corner, saw the City and Suburban Bank abutted on our friend's premises, and felt that I had solved my problem. When you drove home after the concert, I called upon Scotland Yard, and upon the chairman of the bank directors, with the result that you have seen. But how could you tell that they would make their attempt tonight? I asked. Well, when they closed their League offices, that was a sign that they had cared no longer about Mr. Jabez Wilson's presence. In other words, that they had completed their tunnel, but it was essential that they should use it soon, as it might be discovered, or the bullion might be removed. Saturday would suit them better than any other day, as it would give them 2 days for their escape. For all these reasons, I expected them to come tonight. You reasoned it out beautifully, I exclaimed in unfeigned admiration. It is so long a chain, and yet every link rings true. It saved me from ennui, he answered, yawning. Alas, I already feel it closing in upon me. My life is spent in one long effort to escape from the commonplace of existence. These little problems help me to do so. And you are a benefactor of the race, said I. He shrugged his shoulders. Well, perhaps, after all, it is of little use, he remarked. Le hommes... I cannot speak... Fun fact, I cannot speak French for the life of me. Le homme est l'œuvre est tot, as Gustave Flaubert wrote to George Sand. Well, that was the adventure of the Red-Headed League. So did everyone enjoy that little adventure from Sherlock Holmes? Let's see. So Firefly, you were at least close enough that it did have a little bit to do with copying notes. Um, Zadium, Zadium, you were right about money. It involved money. You just didn't really specify which money they were focusing on. And Maverick, you sort of got it right that that redhead's, well, at least one redhead was evil. Yes. So we are gonna have another story, but I am going to do a little 10-minute break for me to get myself prepared for the next one and to refreshen my voice a little bit. So little 10 minutes or more. So I shall be back in just a little bit. And we are back, gentle scholars. Hello there. Firefly, to answer your question, the introduction and ending music both come from Sartre, and the intermission music is a piece by Chopin, who is one of my all-time favorite composers. Sadly, however, I may have to change the introduction music due to the fact that I have run into some copyright issues in the past over it. Although it doesn't seem to have a problem with that in Twitch, but when I have used it in YouTube, I have had apparently the the introduction music noted as being copyrighted, which seems very odd. But yes, hello, welcome. I'm back. And we are going to be doing, yes, the first. You are correct. It is the second gymnop. I can't pronounce words. Gymnopody. The second one that he composed, which I have found to be a little bit more on the lighter side than the first. The first is the one people usually remark on Firefly, but the second one, um, I find just a little bit more enjoyable. Um, the so quite. So we are going to be doing a second story tonight. I don't know if we will be doing a third, most likely not, but we will be doing at least a second one. You've tried playing the first, but it's difficult. Oh, yeah, I have heard that about it. It's a very difficult piece to play. Um, I have a strange fondness for classical piano music. I find it, well, not melancholy, but comforting. It's good music to relax to. So the previous story that we listened to was The Adventure of the Red-Headed League. The next story we are going to listen to is it's a very famous one. The the story I chose because it's very unusual. It's an unusual mystery in some regards. It is also a mystery which is the source of one of the most famous. Thank you for indulging me about the music I always wanted to know. Oh, no, 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 no. I am always happy to talk about such things. I'm always willing to speak with you scholars and open up and explore these topics. You just merely have to ask and I will answer. I'm just happy for you to be here. That's all. It makes me very happy to see you here. You make this all worthwhile. So this second story is also the source of one of the more famous Sherlock Holmes quotes. And in fact, I'm not going to say what the quote is, but it is a quote that was used in the title of a play and has been bounced around every once in a while. It's a reference that's become its own thing, as it were. So the second story for tonight comes from the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, which was the second collection of stories that Conan Doyle published. Um, the first one being called The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. This one is, I believe, which this was the first story actually in the book, um, and it is entitled The Adventures of Silver Blaze. So, is everyone ready and comfy? And once again, I will try and get to a point where I can ask you, fellow scholars, to find out the answer to this mystery. Oh my goodness. For so sit back, relax, Have yourself a cup of tea or whatever hot beverage comforts you at this time of the evening or day. Ah, yes, I went and made tea. Oh, that's wonderful, Firefly. That's wonderful. What manner of tea did you make? Well, whatever it is, I'm sure it's good. So as I was saying, sit back. Oh, chamomile. That's perfect to relax to. I'm quite fond of chamomile. I've had honey chamomile tea before. It is simply marvelous. Sit back, relax, enjoy your cup of tea, and let us listen to the adventure of Silver Blaze. I'm afraid, Watson, that I shall have to go, said Holmes, as we sat down together to our breakfast one morning. Go? Where to? To Dartmoor, to King's Pyland. I was not surprised. Indeed, my only wonder was that he had not already been mixed up in this extraordinary case, which was the one topic of conversation through the length and breadth of England. For a whole day my companion had rambled about the room with his chin upon his chest and his brows knitted, charging and recharging his pipe with the strongest black tobacco, and absolutely deaf to any of my questions or remarks. Fresh editions of every paper had been sent up by our newsagent, only to be glanced over and tossed down into a corner. Yet silent as he was, I knew perfectly well what it was over which he was brooding. There was but one problem before the public which could challenge his powers of analysis, and that was the singular disappearance of the favorite for the Wessex Cup and the tragic murder of its trainer. Firefly, yes, Sherlock the addict. Well, technically, he kind of was. I don't think it's going to be referenced in this story, but for those who don't know, Sherlock for a time had a habit that um, when he wasn't taking a case, he would inject himself with drugs. Don't do drugs, kids. Just don't. Um, the uh, the idea being that it would give his mind something to do. Conan Doyle actually later had Sherlock stop doing that. I don't remember if they ever gave a specific reason, but he eventually ended that habit completely in the stories. When therefore he suddenly announced his intention of setting out for the scene of the drama, it was only what I had both expected and hoped for. I should be most happy to go down with you if I should not be in the way, said I. My dear Watson, you would confer a great favour upon me by coming, and I think your time will not be misspent, for there are points about the case which promise to make an absolutely unique one. We have, I think, just time to catch our train at Paddington, and I will go further into the matter upon our journey. You would oblige me by bringing with you your very excellent field glass. And so it happened that an hour or so later I found myself in the corner of a first-class carriage, flying along en route for Exeter, while Sherlock Holmes, with his sharp eagle face framed in his ear-flapped travelling cap, aha, he's wearing a deerstalker, dipped rapidly into the bundle of fresh papers which he had procured at Paddington. We had left Reading far behind us before he thrust the last one of them under the seat, and offered me his cigar case. Before he thrust the last one of them under the seat, and offered me his cigar case. We are going well, said he, looking out the window and glancing at his watch. Our rate at present is 53.5 miles an hour. I have not observed the quarter-mile post, said I. Nor have I, but the telegraph posts upon this line are 60 yards apart, and the calculation is a simple one. I presume you have looked into this matter of the murder of John Stalker, and the disappearance of Silver Blaze. One moment, folks. I have seen what the Telegraph and the Chronicle have to say. It is one of those cases where the art of the reasoner should be used rather for the sifting of details than for the acquiring of fresh evidence. The tragedy has been so uncommon, so complete, and of such personal importance to so many people, that we are suffering from a plethora of surmise, conjecture, and hypothesis. The difficulty is to detach the framework of fact, of absolute undeniable fact, from the embellishments of theorists and reporters. Then, having established ourselves upon this sound basis, it is our duty to see what inference may be drawn, and what are the special points upon which the whole mystery turns. On Tuesday evening I received telegrams from both Colonel Ross, the owner of the horse, and from Inspector Gregory, who is looking after the case, inviting my cooperation. Tuesday evening? I exclaimed. And this is Thursday morning. Why did you not go down yesterday? Because I made a blunder, my dear Watson, which is, I am afraid, a more common occurrence than anyone would think who only knew me through your memoirs. The fact is that I could not believe it possible that the most remarkable horse in England could long remain concealed, especially in so sparsely inhabited a place as the north of Dartmoor. From hour to hour yesterday I expected to hear that he had been found, and that his abductor was the murderer of John Stalker. When, however, another morning had come, and I found that, beyond the rest of young Fitzroy Simpson, nothing had been done, I felt that it was time for me to take action. Yet in some ways I feel that yesterday has not been wasted. You have formed a theory, then? At least I have got a grip on the essential facts of the case. I shall enumerate them to you, for nothing clears up a case so much as stating it to another person. I can hardly expect your cooperation if I do not show you the position from which we start. I lay back against the cushions, puffing at my cigar, while Holmes, leaning forward with his long, thin forefinger checking off the points upon the palm of his left hand, gave me a sketch of the events which had led to our journey. Silver Blaze, said he, is from the Osmaneri stock, and holds as brilliant a record as his famous ancestor. He is now in his 5th year, and has brought in turn each of the prizes of the turf to Colonel Ross, his fortunate owner. Up to the time of the catastrophe he was the first favourite for the Wessex Cup, the betting being 3-1. He has always, however, been a prime favourite with the racing public, and has never yet disappointed them, so that even at those odds enormous sums of money have been laid upon him. It is obvious, therefore, that there were many people who had the strongest interest in preventing Silver Blaze from being there at the fall of the flag next Tuesday. This fact, of course, appreciated at King's Pyland, where the Colonel's training stable is situated, every precaution was taken to guard the favourite. The trainer, John Straker, is a retired jockey who rode in Colonel Ross's colours before he became too heavy for the weighing chair. He had served the Colonel for 5 years as jockey, and for 7 as trainer, and had always shown himself to be a zealous and honest servant. Under him were 3 lads, for the establishment was a small one, containing only 4 horses in all. One of these lads sat up each night in the stable, while the others slept in the loft. All 3 bore excellent characters. John Straker, who was a married man, lived in a small villa about 200 yards from the stables. He has no children, keeps 1 maidservant, and is comfortably off. The country round is very lonely, but about half a mile to the north there is a small cluster of villas, which have been built by a Tavistock contractor for the use of invalids and others who may wish to enjoy the pure Dartmoor air. Tavistock itself lies 2 miles to the west, while across the moor, also about 2 miles distant, is the larger training establishment of Calperton, which belongs to Lord Backwater, and is managed by Silas Brown. In every other direction, the moor is a complete wilderness, inhabited only by a few roaming gypsies. Such was the general situation last Monday night, when the catastrophe occurred. On that evening, the horses had been exercised and watered as usual. The stables were locked up at 9 o'clock. Two of the lads walked up to the trainer's house, where they had supper in the kitchen, while the third, Ned Hunter, remained on guard. At a few minutes after 9, the maid, Edith Baxter, carried down to the stables his supper, which contained a which consisted of a dish of curried mutton. She took no liquid, as there was a water tap in the stables, and it was the rule that the lad on duty should drink nothing else. Kind of harsh there, but I guess that makes sense a little bit. The maid carried a lantern with her, as it was very dark, and the path ran across the open moor. Edith Baxter was within 30 yards of the stables, when a man appeared out of the darkness and called to her to stop. As she stepped into the circle of yellow light thrown by the lantern, she thought that it was a person of gentlemanly bearing, dressed in a grey suit of tweed with a cloth cap. He wore gaiters and carried a heavy stick with a knob to it. She was most impressed, however, by the extreme pallor of his face and by the nervousness of his manner. His age, she thought, would be rather over 30 than under it. "Can you tell me where I am?" he asked. "I had almost made up my mind to sleep on the moor when I saw the light of your lanterns." "You are closer to the King's Pyland training stables," she said. "Oh, indeed! What a stroke of luck!" he cried. "I understand a stable boy sleeps there alone every night. Perhaps that is his supper which you are carrying to him. Now I am sure that you would not be too proud to earn the price of a new dress, would you?" He took a piece of white paper folded up out of his waistcoat pocket. "See that the boy has this tonight, and you shall have the prettiest frock that money can buy." Kind of creepy there, I guess. She was frightened by the earnestness of his manner, and ran past him to the window, through which she was accustomed to hand the meals. It was already opened, and Hunter was seated at the small table inside. She had begun to tell him of what had happened, when the stranger came up again. "Good evening," said he, looking through the window. "I wanted to have a word with you." The girl had sworn that as he spoke, she noticed the corner of the little paper packet protruding from his close hand. "What business have you here?" asked the lad. "It's business that may put something into your pocket," said the other. "You've two horses in for the Wessex Cup, Silver Blaze and Bayard. Let me have the straight tip, and you won't be a loser. Is it a fact that at the weights Bayard could give the other 100 yards in 5 furlongs, and that the stable have put their money on him?" "So you're one of those damned touts." "Ooh, language, language, language," cried the lad. "I'll show you how we serve them in King's Pyland." He sprang up and rushed across the stable to unloose the dog. The girl fled away to the house, but as she looked back and saw that the stranger was leaning through the window, as she ran, she looked back and saw that the stranger was leaning through the window. A minute later, however, when Hunter rushed out with the hound, he was gone. Though he ran all round the buildings, he failed to find any trace of him. "One moment," I asked. "Did the stable boy, when he ran out with the dog, leave the door unlocked behind him?" "Excellent, Watson, excellent," murmured my companion. "The importance of the point struck me so forcibly that I sent in a special wire to Dartmoor yesterday to clear the matter up. The boy locked the door before he left it. The window, I might add, was not large enough for a man to get through." Hunter waited until his fellow grooms had returned, when he sent a message to the trainer and told him what had occurred. Straker was excited at hearing the account, although he did not seem to have quite realized its true significance. It left him, however, vaguely uneasy, and Mrs. Straker, waking at 1 in the morning, found that he was dressing. In reply to her inquiries, he said that he could not sleep on account of his anxiety about the horses, and that he intended to walk down to the stables to see that all was well. She begged him to remain at home, as she could hear the rain pattering against the window, but in spite of her entreaties, he pulled on his large mackintosh and left the house. Oh my goodness. Mrs. Straker awoke at 7 in the morning to find that her husband had not yet returned. She dressed herself hastily, called the maid, and set off for the stables. The door was open. Inside, huddled together upon a chair, Hunter was sunk in a state of absolute stupor. The favorite stall was empty, and there was no signs of his trainer. The two lads who slept in the chaff-cutting loft above the harness room were quickly aroused. They had heard nothing during the night, for they are both sound sleepers. Hunter was obviously under the influence of some powerful drug, and as no sense could be got out of him, he was left to sleep it off while the two lads and the two women ran out in search of the absentees. They still had hopes that the trainer had for some reason taken out the horse for early exercise, but on ascending the knoll near the house, from which all the neighboring moors were visible, they not only could see no signs of the missing favorite, but they perceived something which warned them that they were in the presence of a tragedy. About a quarter of a mile from the stables, John Straker's overcoat was flapping from a furze bush. Immediately beyond there was a bowl-shaped depression in the moor, and at the bottom of this was found the dead body of the unfortunate trainer. His head had been shattered by a savage blow from some heavy weapon, and he was wounded on the thigh, where there was a long, clean cut, inflicted inevitably by some very sharp instrument. It was clear, however, that Straker had defended himself vigorously against his assailants, for in his right hand he held a small knife, which was clotted with blood up to the handle, while in his left he clasped a red and black silk cravat, which was recognized by the maid as having been worn on the preceding evenings by the stranger who had visited the stables. Hunter, on recovering from his stupor, was also quite positive as to the ownership of the cravat. He was equally certain that the same stranger had, while standing at the window, drugged his curried mutton, and so deprived the stables of their watchman. Dun dun dun. As to the missing horse, there was abundant proofs in the mud which lay at the bottom of the fatal hollow that he had been there at the time of the struggle, but from that morning he has disappeared, and although a large reward has been offered, and all the gypsies of Dodmore are on the alert, no news has come of him. Finally, an analysis has shown that the remains of his supper left by the stable lad contained an appreciative quantity of powdered opium. Oh man. Oh lord. Oh great eye. Opium as a to drug him. Oh my goodness. While the people at the home partook of the same dish on the same night without any ill effects. Those are the main facts of the case, stripped of all surmise, and stated as baldly as possible. I shall now recapitulate what the police have done in the matter. Oh, Holmes's voice is very hard to do, folks. Inspector Gregory, to whom the case has been committed, is an extremely competent officer. Were he but gifted with imagination, he might rise to great heights in his profession. Now, this is a nice little change because early on, Holmes was he tended to be very dismissive of the police, But as the stories progress, he becomes more and more appreciative, and also the police tend to get, oh, hello, Alchemist, thank you for the lurk. Um, as the stories go on, Holmes becomes more and more appreciative of the police, and also the police tend to be written a little bit more competent as Doyle continued the series. Not that he wanted to, of course, that's quite a famous fact, but he was kind of forced to do it. Oh, on your way home from work but wanted to sit in for a bit. Oh, it's appreciative. Thank you. It's very appreciative for you to be here. The it's very famous that Doyle wanted Holmes gone, but everyone from his publisher to his mother-in-law wanted Holmes back, so he had little choice in the matter. But that's much later than this story, as we were saying. Inspector Gregory, to whom the case had been committed, is an extremely competent officer. Were he but gifted with imagination, he might rise to great heights in his profession. On his arrival, he promptly found and arrested the man upon whom suspicion naturally rested. There was little difficulty in finding him, for he inhabited one of those villas which I have mentioned. His name, it appears, was Fitzroy Simpson. He was a man of excellent birth and education, who had squandered a fortune upon the turf, and who lived now by doing a little quiet and genteel bookmaking in the sporting clubs of London. An examination of his betting book shows that bets to the amount of £5,000 have been registered by him against the favourite. Ooh, isn't that suspicious? On being arrested, he volunteered the statement that he had come down to Dartmoor in the hopes of getting some information about the King Pilot's horses, and also about Dresborough, the second favourite, which was in charge of Silas Brown, at the Capleton stables. He did not attempt to deny that he had acted as described upon the evening before, but declared that he had no sinister designs, and had simply wished to obtain first-hand information. When confronted with his cravat, he turned very pale, and was utterly unable to account for its presence in the hands of the murdered man. His wet clothing showed that he had been out in the storm of the night before, and his stick, which was a Penang lawyer weighted with lead, was just such a weapon as might, by repeated blows, have inflicted the terrible injuries to which the trainer had succumbed. On the other hand, there was no wound upon his person, while the state of Straker's knife would show that one at least of his assailants must bear his mark upon him. There you have it all in a nutshell, Watson, and if you give me any light, I shall be infinitely obliged to you. I had listened with the greatest interest to the statement which Holmes, with characteristic clearness, had laid before me. Though most of the facts were familiar to me, I had not sufficiently appreciated their relative importance, nor their connection to each other. Oh my goodness. Is it not possible, I suggested, that the incised wound upon Straker may have been caused by his own knife in the convulsive struggles which follow any brain injury? It's more than possible. It is probable, said Holmes. In that case, one of the main points in favor of the accused disappears. And yet, said I, even now I fail to understand what the theory of the police can be. I am afraid that whatever theory we state has very little grave objections to it, returned my companion. The police imagine, I take it, that this Fitzroy Simpson, having drugged the lad, and having in some way obtained a duplicate key, opened the stable door, and took out the horse, with the intention, apparently, of kidnapping him altogether. His bridle is missing, so that Simpson must have put this on. Then, having left the door open behind him, which, if you think about it, it's kind of a stupid move to make anyway, he was leading the horse away over the moor, when he was either met or overtaken by the trainer. A row naturally ensued, Simpson beat out the trainer's brain with his heavy stick without receiving any injury from the small knife which Straker used in self-defense. Hmm, odd. And then the thief either led the horse on to some secret hiding place, or else it may have bolted during the struggle, and be now wandering out on the moors. That is the case as it appears to the police, and improbable as it is, all other explanations are more improbable still. However, I shall very quickly test the matter when I am once more upon the spot, and until then I cannot really see how we can get much further than our present position. It was evening before we reached the little town of Tavistock, which lies, like the boss of a shield, in the middle of the huge circle of Dartmoor. Two gentlemen were awaiting us in the station. The one, a tall, fair man with lion-like hair and beard, and curiously penetrating light blue eyes. The other, a small, alert person, very neat and dapper, in a frock coat and gaiters, with trim little side whiskers and an eyeglass. The latter was Colonel Ross, the well-known sportsman. The other, Inspector Gregory, a man who was rapidly making his name in the English detective service. "I am happy you have come down, Mr. Holmes," said the colonel. "The inspector here has done all that could possibly be suggested, but I wish to leave no stone unturned in trying to avenge poor Staker, and in recovering my horse." "Have there been any fresh developments?" asked Holmes. "I'm sorry to say that we have made very little progress," said the inspector. "We have an open carriage outside, and as you would no doubt like to see the place before the light fails, we might talk it over as we drive." A minute later we were all seated in a comfortable landau. Some of these words, so archaic, so odd. And were rattling through the quaint old Devonshire city. Inspector Gregory was full on his case, and poured out a stream of remarks, while Holmes threw in an occasional question or interjection. Colonel Ross leaned back with his arms folded and his hat tilted over his eyes, while I listened with interest to the dialogue of the two detectives. Gregory was formulating his theory, which was almost exactly what Holmes had foretold in the train. The net is drawn pretty close around Fitzroy Simpson," he remarked, "and I believe myself that he is our man. At the same time I recognize that the evidence is purely circumstantial, and that some new development may upset it." "How about Straker's knife?" We have quite come to the conclusion that he wounded himself in his fall. My friend Dr. Watson made that suggestion to me as we came down. If so, it would tell against this man Simpson." There. "Undoubtedly, he has neither a knife nor any sign of a wound. The evidence against him is certainly very strong. He had a great interest in the disappearance of the favourite. He lies under suspicion of having poisoned the stable boy. He was undoubtedly out in the storm. He was armed with a heavy stick, and his cravat was found in the dead man's hand. I really think we have enough to go before a jury." Holmes shook his head. "A clever counsel would tear it all to rags," said he. "Why should he take the horse out of the stable? If he wished to injure it, why could he not do it there? Has a duplicate key been found in his possession? What chemist sold him the powdered opium? Above all, where could he, a stranger to the district, hide a horse, and such a horse as this? What is his own explanation as to the paper which he wished the maid to give to the stable boy? He says that it was a £10 note. One was found in his purse. But your other difficulties are not so formidable as they seem. He is not a stranger to the district. He has twice lodged at Tavistock in the summer. The opium was probably brought from London. The key, having served its purpose, will be hurled away. The horse may be at the bottom of one of the pits or old mines upon the moor. What does he say about the cravat? Well, he acknowledges that it is his, and declares that he had lost it. But a new but a new element has been introduced in the case which may account for his leading the horse from the stable. Holmes pricked up his ears. We have found traces which show that a party of gypsies encamped on Monday night within a mile of the spot where the murder took place. On Tuesday they were gone. Now, presumably, there was some understanding between Simpson and these gypsies. Might he not have been leading the horse to them when he was overtaken, and may they not have him now? It is certainly possible. The moor has been scouted for these gypsies. I have also examined every stable and outhouse in Tavistock, and for a radius of 10 miles. There is another trading stable quite close, I understand. Yes, and that is a factor which we must certainly not neglect. As Desborough, their horse, was second in the betting, they had an interest in the disappearance of the favourite. Silas Brown, the trainer, is known to have had large bets upon the event, and he was no friend to poor Straker. We have, however, examined the stables, and there is nothing to connect him with the affair. And nothing to connect this man Simpson with the interests of the Capleton stables. Nothing at all. Holmes leaned back in the carriage, and the conversation ceased. A few minutes later, our driver pulled up at a neat little red brick villa, with overhanging eaves, which stood by the road. Some distance off, across the paddock, lay a long, grey tiled outbuilding. In every other direction the low curves of the moor, bronze-coloured from the fading ferns, stretched away to the skyline, broken only by the steeples of Tavistock, and by a cluster of houses away to the westward which marked the Capleton stables. We all sprang out with the exception of Holmes, who continued to lean back with his eyes fixed upon the sky in front of him, entirely absorbed in his own thoughts. It was only when I touched his arm that he roused himself with a violent start, and stepped out of the carriage. "Excuse me," said he, turning to Colonel Ross, who had looked at him in some surprise. "How's daydreaming?" There was a gleam in his eyes, and a suppressed excitement in his manner which convinced me, used as I was to his ways, that his hand was upon a clue, though I could not imagine where he had found it. There's an interesting thing with the story version. I'm sure a lot of you have seen, like, televised versions featuring Sherlock and such, but the Sherlock Holmes of the stories is actually a fairly emotive character. He smiles, he grins, he chuckles. He's quite interesting. Perhaps you would prefer at once to go on to the scene of the crime, Mr. Holmes? I think that I should prefer to stay here a little, and go into one or two questions of detail. Stoker was brought back here, I presume? Yes, he lies upstairs. The inquest is tomorrow. He has been in your service some years, Colonel Ross? I have always found him an excellent servant. I presume that you made an inventory of what he had in his pockets at the time of his death, Inspector. I have the things themselves in the sitting room, if you would care to see them. I should be very glad. We all filed into the front room and sat round the central table, while the inspector unlocked a square tin box and laid a small heap of things before us. There was a box of Vestas, 2 inches of tallow candle, an ADP briar root pipe, a pouch of seal skin with half an ounce of lawn-cut Cavendish, which I believe is a kind of tobacco, a silver watch with a gold chain, 5 sovereigns in gold, an aluminum pencil case, or aluminium if you are from the other side of the ocean, a few papers, and an ivory-handled knife with a very delicate, inflexible blade marked West & Co., London. This is a very singular blade, said Holmes, lifting it up and examining it minutely. I presume, as I see bloodstains upon it, that it is the one which was found in the dead man's grasp. Watson, this knife is surely in your line?" "It is what we call a cataract knife," said I. "I thought so. A very delicate knife, devised for very delicate work. A strange thing for a man to carry with him upon a rough expedition, especially as it would not shut in his pocket." "The tip was guarded by a disc of cork, which he found beside his body," said the inspector. "His wife tells us that the knife had laid upon the dressing table, that he had picked it up as he left the room. It was a poor weapon, but perhaps the best that he could lay his hands on at the moment." "Very possibly. How about the paper? How about these papers?" "Three of them are receipted hay dealers' accounts. One of them is a letter of instructions from Colonel Ross. The other is a milliner's account for £37.15 made out by Madame Lesher of Bond Street to William Derbyshire. Mrs. Straker tells us that Derbyshire was a friend of her husband's, and that occasionally his letters were addressed here. Madame Derbyshire has oh, Madame Derbyshire has somewhat expensive tastes," remarked Holmes, glancing down the account. 22 guineas in rather heavy. 22 guineas is rather heavy for a single costume. However, there appears to be nothing more to learn, and we may now go down to the scene of the crime. As we emerged from the sitting room, a woman, who had been waiting in the passage, took a step forward, and laid her hand upon the inspector's sleeve. Her face was haggard, and thin, and eager, stamped with the print of a recent horror. "Have you got them? Have you found them?" she panted. "No, Mrs. Straker, but Mr. Holmes here has come from London to help us, and we shall do all that is possible." "Surely I met you in Plymouth at a garden party some little time ago, Mrs. Straker," said Holmes. "No, sir, you are mistaken." "Dear me! Why, I could have sworn to it. You are a costume of dove-coloured silk, with ostrich feather trimmings." "I never had such a dress, sir," answered the lady. "Ah, that quite settles it," said Holmes. Interesting." And with an apology he followed the inspector outside. A short walk across the moor took us to the hollow in which the body had been found. At the brink of it was the furze bush upon which the coat had been hung. "There was no wind that night, I understand," said Holmes. "None. It was but a very heavy rain." "In that case, the overcoat was not blown against the furze bush, but placed there." "Yes, it was laid across the bush." "You fill me with interest. I perceive that the ground has been trampled up a good deal. No doubt many feet have been here since Monday night. A piece of matting has been laid here at the side, and we have all stood upon that." "Excellent." "In this bag I have one of the boots which Straker wore, one of Fitzroy Simpson's shoes, and a cast horseshoe of Silver Blaze." "My dear Inspector, you surpass yourself." Holmes took the bag, and descending into the hollow, he pushed the matting into a more central position. Then stretching himself upon his face, and leaning his chin upon his hands, he made a careful study of the trampled mud in front of him. "Hello," said he, suddenly. "What's this?" It was a wax vesta, half burned, which was so coated with mud that it looked at first like a little chip of wood. "I cannot think how I came to overlook it," said the inspector with an expression of annoyance. "It was invisible, buried in the mud. I only saw it because I was looking for it." "What? You expected to find it?" "I thought it not unlikely." He took the boots from the bag, and compared the impressions of each of them with marks upon the ground. Then he clambered up to the rim of the hollow and crawled out among the ferns and bushes. I'm afraid that there are no more tracks. No, that's the inspector. Sorry, wrong voice. I'm afraid that there are no more tracks, said the inspector. I've examined the ground very carefully for 100 yards in each direction. That's the problem with doing so many voices in these stories, you can sometimes mix them up. Indeed, said Holmes, rising. I should not have the impertinence to do it again, after what you say, but I shouldn't like to take a little walk over the moor before it grows dark, that I may know my ground tomorrow. And I think that I shall put this horseshoe into my pocket for luck. Okay, that made me chuckle. Colonel Ross, who had shown some signs of impatience at my companion's quiet and systematic method of work, glanced at his watch. I wish I wish you would come back with me, Inspector, said he. There are several points on which I should like your advice, and especially as to whether we do not owe it to the public to remove our horse's name from the entries for the cup. Certainly not, cried Holmes with decision. I should let the name stand. The colonel bowed. I am very glad to have had your opinion, sir, said he. You will find us at poor Straker's house when you have finished your walk, and we can drive together into Tavistock. He turned back with the inspector, while Holmes and I walked slowly across the moor. The sun was beginning to sink behind the stables of Capleton, and the long sloping plain in front of us was tinged with gold, deepening into rich, ruddy browns which the faded ferns and brambles caught the evening light. But the glories of the landscape were all wasted upon my companion, who was sunk in the deepest thought. It's this way, Watson, said he at last. We may leave the question of who killed John Straker for the instant, and confine ourselves to find out what has become of the horse. Now, supposing that he broke away during or after the tragedy, where could he have gone to? The horse is a very gregarious creature. If left to himself, his instincts would have been either to return to King's Pyland or go over to Capleton. Why should he run wild upon the moor? He would surely have been seen by now. And why should gypsies kidnap him? These people always clear out when they hear of trouble, for they do not wish to be pestered by the police. Smart move there. They could not hope to sell such a horse. They would run a great risk and gain nothing by taking him. Surely that is clear. Where is he, then? I have already said that he must have gone to King's Pyland or to Capleton. He is not at King's Pyland, therefore he is at Capleton. Let us take that as a working hypothesis, and see where it leads us, what it leads us to. This part of the moor, as the inspector remarked, is very hard and dry, but it falls away towards Capleton, and you can see from here that there is a long hollow over yonder, which must have been very wet on Monday night. If our supposition is correct, then the horse must have crossed that, and there is the point where we should look for his tracks. We had been walking briskly during this conversation, and a few more minutes brought us to the hollow in question. At Holmes' request, I walked down the bank to the right, and he to the left, but I had not taken 50 paces before I heard. my voice gave, my voice stumbled for a second there. Before I heard him give a shout and saw him waving his hand to me. The track of a horse was plainly outlined in the soft earth in front of him, and the shoe which he took from his pocket exactly fitted the impression. See the value of imagination, said Holmes. It is the one quality which Gregory lacks. We imagined what might have happened, acted upon the supposition, and find ourselves justified. Let us proceed. We crossed the marshy bottom and passed over a quarter of a mile of dry, hard turf. Again the ground sloped, and again we came on the tracks. And then we lost them for half a mile. but only to pick them up once more quite close to Capleton. It was Holmes who saw them first, and he stood pointing with a look of triumph upon his face. A man's track was visible beside the horse's. The horse was excuse me. The horse was alone before, I cried. Quite so. It was alone before. Hello? What is this? The double track turned sharp off and took the direction of King's Pyland. Holmes whistled, and we both followed along after it. His eyes were on the trail, but I happened to look a little to one side, and saw, to my surprise, the same tracks coming back again, in the opposite direction. "One for you, Watson," said Holmes, when I pointed out. "You have saved us a long walk, which would have brought us back on our own traces. Let us follow the return track." We had not gone. We had not gone. Bleh, words. We had not to go far. It ended at the paving of asphalt which led up to the gates of the Capleton stables. As we approached, a groom ran out from them. "We don't want any loiterers around here," said he. "I should only wish to ask a question," said Holmes, with his finger and thumb in his waistcoat pocket. "Should I be too early to see your master, Mr. Silas Brown, if I were to call at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning?" "Bless you, sir, if any one is about, he will be, for he is always the first stirring. But here he is, sir, to answer your questions for himself. No, sir, no, it is as much as my place is worth to let him see me touch your money, afterwards, if you like." As Sherlock Holmes replaced the half-crown which he had drawn from his pocket, a fierce-looking elderly man strode out from the gate, with a hunting-crop swinging in his hands. "What's this, Dawson?" he cried. "No gossiping! Go on about your business. And you, what the devil do you want here?" "10-minute talk with you, my good sir," said Holmes in the sweetest of voices. "I've no time to talk to every gadabout. We want no stranger here. Be off, or you may find a dog at your heels." Holmes leaned forward and whispered something in the trainer's ear. He started violently and flushed to the temples. "It's a lie!" he shouted. "An infernal lie!" "Very good. Shall we argue about it here in public, or talk it over in your parlour?" "Oh, come in if you wish to." "Very good. Shall we... Oh, Holmes smiled. "I shall not keep you more than a few minutes, Watson," said he. "Now, Mr. Brown, I am quite at your disposal." It was 20 minutes, and the reds had all faded into greys before Holmes and the trainer reappeared. Never have I seen such a change as had been brought about in Silas Brown in that short time. His face was ashy pale, beads of beads of my dear scholars, sometimes I fumble my words so badly. I'm going to do it the easier way. Beads of sweat shot upon his brow, and his hands shook until the hunting crop wagged like a branch in the wind. His bullying, overbearing manner was all gone too, and he cringed along at my companion's side, like a dog with its master. "Your instructions will be done. It shall all be done," said he. "There must be no mistake," said Holmes, looking round at him. The other winced as he read the menace in his eyes. "Oh no, there shall be no mistake. It shall be there. Shall I change it first or not?" Holmes thought a little and then burst out laughing. "No, don't," said he. "I shall write to you about it. No tricks now, or, oh, you can trust me, you can trust me." "You must see to it on the day as if it were your own." "You can rely upon me." Yes, I think I can. Well, you shall hear from me tomorrow. He turned upon his heel, disregarding the trembling hand which the others held out to him, and we set off for King's Pyland. A more perfect compound of the bully, coward, and sneak than Master Silas Brown I have seldom met with, remarked Holmes as we trudged along together. So, scholars, why do you think Silas is so nervous? There's a little bit of a mystery I'm letting you ask because it will be revealed in just a second. What do you think Holmes said to Silas that got him so shaken? Oh, hello, Julian. Welcome to the study. Good to see you. No idea, Maverick? Hmm. Anyone else have any ideas? What what was it that Sherlock Holmes said to Silas Brown that got him so shaken up and so willing to cooperate? Because he doesn't sound like a man who would normally be that frightened of something. Anyone? Well, can you give a guess? Julian, only Holmes knows. Well, Holmes knows, but they do hint at it heavily what it is. In fact, Silas sort of said it. If there's no more guesses, I will go on, and we'll find out just what it was that Holmes said to Silas. He has the horse, then. Oh, he tried to bluster out of it, but I described to him so exactly what his actions have been upon that morning that he is convinced that I was watching him. Of course you observe the particularly square toes in the impressions, and that his own boots exactly corresponded to them. There's the answer. Again, of course, no subordinate would have dared to do such a thing. I described to him how, when according to his custom he was the first down, he perceived a strange horse wandering over the moors. How he went out to it, and his astonishment at recognizing from the white forehead which has given the favourite its name, that chance had put in his power the only horse which could beat the one upon which he had put his money. Then he described how his first impulse had been to lead him back to King's Pyland, and how the devil had showed him how he could hide the horse until the race was over, and how he had led it back and concealed it at Capleton. When I told him every detail, he gave it up and thought only of saving his own skin. But his stables had been searched. Oh, an old horse faker like him has many a dodge. But you are not afraid to leave the horse in his power now, since he has every interest in injuring it. My dear fellow, he will guard it as the apple of his eye. He knows that his only hope of mercy is to produce it safe. Colonel Ross did not impress me as a man who would be likely to show much mercy in any case. The matter does not rest with Colonel Ross. I follow my own methods, and tell as much as or and tell as much or as little as I choose. That is the advantage of being unofficial. I don't know whether you observed it, Watson, but the Colonel's manner has been just a trifle cavalier to me. I am inclined now to have a little amusement at his expense. Say nothing to him about the horse. Certainly not without your permission. And of course this is all quite a minor point compared to the question of who killed John Straker. And you will devote yourself to that? On the contrary, we both go back to London by the night train. I was thunderstruck by my friend's words. We had only been a few hours in Devonshire, and that he should give up an investigation, which he had begun so brilliantly, was quite incomprehensible to me. Not a word more could I draw from him until we were back at the trainer's house. The colonel and the inspector were awaiting us in the parlor. My friend and I returned to town by the night express, said Holmes. We have had a charming little breath of your beautiful Dartmoor air. The inspector opened his eyes, and the colonel's lip curled in a sneer. So you despair of arresting the murderer of poor Straker, said he. Holmes shrugged his shoulders. There are certainly grave difficulties in the way, said he. I have every hope, however, that your horse will start upon Tuesday, and I beg that you will have your jockey in readiness. May I ask for a photograph of John Straker? The inspector took one from an envelope and handed it to me. My dear Gregory, you anticipate all my wants. If I might ask you to wait here for an instant, I have a question which I should like to put to your maid. I would like to put to the maid. I must say that I am rather disappointed in our London consultant, said Colonel Ross, bluntly, as my friend left the room. I do not see that we are any further than when we came, than he came. At least you have his assurance that your horse will run, said I. Yes, I have, I have his assurance, said the colonel, with a shrug of his shoulders. I should prefer to have the horse. I was about to make some reply in defense of my friend, when he entered the room again. Now, gentlemen, said he, I am quite ready for Tavistock. As we stepped in the carriage, one of the stable lads held the door open for us. A sudden idea seemed to occur to Holmes, for he leaned forward and touched the lad upon the sleeve. You have a few sheep in the paddock, he said. Who attends to them? I do, sir. Have you noticed anything amiss with them of late? Well, sir, not of much account. But 3 of 'em have gone lame, sir. I could see that Holmes was I could see that Holmes was extremely pleased, for he chuckled and rubbed his hands together. A long shot, Watson, a very long shot, said he, pinching my arm. Gregory, let me recommend to your attention this singular epidemic among the sheep. Drive on, coachman. Colonel Ross still wore an expression which showed the poor opinion which he had formed of my companion's ability, but I saw by the inspector's face that his attention had been keenly aroused. You consider that to be important? He asked. Exceedingly so. Is there any point to which... Oh, sorry. Got the voices wrong again. Oops. It would help if Conan Doyle sometimes labeled his characters when he was speaking. You expect that to be importance? He asked. The inspector, I missed that. Exceedingly so. Is there any point to which you would wish to draw my attention? To the curious incident of the dog in the night time. The dog did nothing in the night time. That was the curious incident, remarked Sherlock Holmes. That line, by the way, is a very famous line that comes out of this story. It was later used as the title of an award-winning play, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night. So now I am pausing for a second, and let us, scholars, look at the story so far. So we have John Straker, found on the moor, his head bludgeoned, found with his arm partially cut, and in his hand was a knife with a layer of blood on it. A knife which we are told is a cataract knife, a knife of fine, delicate work. Also, it seems that the sheep have gone lame, started going lame as of late. And we also have the fact that of the curious incident of the dog in the night. So, my dear scholars, I open it up to you. What, who do you think killed John Straker? With all the facts we have been given so far in the story, who is the murderer? Firefly, I have not read this one. Well, that's fine. That's fine. So you'll get to see what how the who actually did the murder. Like I said, I've given you all the facts that we have, all also including that Holmes seems to have recognized Straker's wife. Interesting there. So who was the murderer? Anyone have any theories? I open it up to the floor for you scholars to decide. And it's all right. I will take any theory. And if you have read the story or heard the story, please do not spoil it for the others. Anyone? Anyone have any ideas of who the murderer of John Straker was? Ah, Dr. Zadium, I won't comment because I know this tale. Oh, okay, okay, yes, that is wise of you. Ah, you are stumped. Private Maverick stumped. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, it is a very unusual case, isn't it? At least we know where the horse is now. This story is also one of the few times when Holmes rightfully wears a deerstalker. A lot of people always, when they think of Sherlock Holmes, they think about him wearing a deerstalker cap and wearing that overcoat all the time, which is a very odd thing for a man of his style to wear in the city. That is a style you only wear in the countryside. You never wear in the city, and only a few times does Holmes actually would Holmes actually dress like that. And I think there's only like two stories, and this is the only one that was specifically written with him wearing it. Now you might ask, why does he wear it then? Well, the actual reason was it was developed for the stage because you wanted Sherlock Holmes to stand out among the other characters in stage plays, so they put him in it as a costume for him to become more identifiable. And of course, over the years, it became his most identifiable look. No, your Firefly, did my guess not show up? No, it looks like it did not. Firefly, what is your guess? The illustration actually used in this an interesting theory there, Firefly. Firefly says that the horse did it. That's interesting. Interesting idea there. So you're saying the animal itself was the murderer? Hmm. That is curious. That is a curious thought. Anyone else have any other theories? If not, I shall continue with our story and we shall see who killed John Strokes. Strokes, or however you pronounce it. Okay, so with a quick drink of water, let us conclude this little adventure. 4 days later, Holmes and I were again in the train, bound for Winchester to see the race for the Wessex Cup. Colonel Ross met us by appointment outside the station, and we drove in his drag to the course beyond the town. His face was grave, and his manner was cold in the extreme. "I've seen nothing of my horse," said he. "I suppose you would know him when you saw him?" asked Holmes. The colonel was very angry. "I have been on the turf for 20 years, and never was asked such a question as that before," said he. "A child would know Silverblaze, with his white forehead and his mottled off foreleg." "How is the betting?" "Well, that is the curious part of it. You should have got 15 to 1 yesterday, but the price has become shorter and shorter, till you can hardly get 3 to 1 now." "Hmm," said Holmes. "Somebody knows something, that is clear." As the drag drew up in the enclosure near the grand stand, I glanced at the card to see the entries it ran. Wessex Plate, 50 sovereigns each Foot, with 1,000 sovereigns added for 4 and 5-year-olds. Second, £300. Third, £200. New course, 1 mile and 5 furlongs. Number 1, Mr. Heath Newton's the. No, I'm not saying this. Okay, okay, okay. Okay, so again, I said this story was written in the 19th century, and one of these horses has a very, very, very offensive name. I'm not going to say it, so we are going to have to come up with a an alternative, scholars. What shall we call this horse? It needs a new name. I know it might be blasphemy to change a single word of Mr. Doyle's writing, but I am not going to say this word. Anyone have a suggestion for a new horse name? Dr. Zadium says Mr. Ed. Anyone else got suggestions? I want to hear them all. Zenyatta. Oh, that's a Firefly says Zenyatta. Oh, that's a nice name. That is a really nice name, Firefly. Anyone else? Anyone else got a horse name that they want to include in this? Anyone? Anyone can give any name as long as it's not an offensive one. Because we're not going to replace an offensive name with another offensive name. Anyone have any other name they want to give this horse? The floor is open to you, my scholars. All right. Number 1, Mr. Heath Newton's Mr. Ed Zenyatta, Red Cap, Cinnamon Jacket. Number 2, Colonel Wardlaw's Pugilist, Pink cap, blue and black jacket. Number 3, Lord Backwater's Desborough, yellow cap and sleeves. Number 4, Colonel Ross's Silver Blaze, black cap, red jacket. Number 5, Duke of Balmoral's Iris, yellow and black stripes. And number 6, Lord Singleford's Rasper, like my voice, purple cap, black sleeves. We scratched out our we scratched we scratched our other ugh, sorry. We scratched our other one and put all hopes on your word, said the colonel. Why, what is that? Silver Blaze favourite? So not he doesn't have a Cockney accent. Silver Blaze favourite? 5-4 against Silver Blaze, roared the rain. 5-4 against Silver Blaze. 15-5 against Desborough. 5-4 on the field. There are the numbers up, I cried. They are all 6 there. All 6 there? Then my horse is running, cried the colonel in great agitation. But I don't see him. My colours have not passed. Only 5 have passed. This must be he. As I spoke, a powerful bay horse swept out from the weighing enclosure and cantered past us, bearing on its back the well-known black and red of the colonel. That's not my horse, cried the owner. That beast has not a white hair upon its body. What is this that you have done, Mr. Holmes? Well, well, let us see how he gets on, said my friend, imperturbably. For a few minutes he gazed through my field-glass. Capital! An excellent start! he cried suddenly. There they are, coming round the curve. From our drag we had a superb view as they came up the straight. The 6 horses were so close together that a carpet could have covered them. But halfway up the yellow of the Capleton stables showed to the front. Before they reached us, however, Desborough's bolt was shot, and the colonel's horse, coming away with a rush, passed the post a good 6 lengths before its rival, the Duke of Balmoral's Iris, making a bad third. It's my race, anyhow, gasped the colonel, pressing his hand over his eyes. I confess that I can make neither head nor tail of it. Don't you think you have kept up your mystery long enough, Mr. Holmes? Certainly, Colonel. You shall know everything. Let us all go round and have a look at the horse together. Here he is, he continued as we made our way into the weighing enclosure, where only owners and their friends find admittance. You have only to wash his face and his leg in spirits of wine, and you will find that he is the same old Silver Blaze as ever. You take my breath away. I found him in the hands of a faker, and took the liberty of running him just as he was sent over. My dear sir, you have done wonders. The horse looks very fit and well. It never went better in its life. I owe you 1,000 apologies for having doubted your ability. You have done me a great service by recovering my horse. You would do me a greater still if you could lay your hands on the murderer of John Straker. I have done so, said Holmes quietly. The colonel and I stared at him in amazement. You've got him? Where is he, then? He is here. Here? Where? In my company at the present moment. The colonel flushed angrily. I quite recognize that I am under obligations to you, sir. To you, Mr. Holmes, said he, but I must regard what you have just said as either a very bad joke or an insult. Sherlock Holmes laughed. I assure you that I have not associated you with the crime, Colonel, said he. The real murderer is standing immediately behind you. He stepped past and laid his hand upon the glossy neck of the thoroughbred. "The horse!" cried both the colonel and myself. "Yes, the horse, and it may lessen his guilt if I say that it was done in self-defense, and that John Straker was a man who was entirely unworthy of your confidence. But there goes the bell, and as I stand to win a little on this next race, I shall defer a lengthy explanation until a more fitting time." You got it right, Firefly. Congratulations. You got the right answer. Yay! Congratulations, Firefly, on figuring out the mystery. We had the corner of a Pullman car to ourselves that evening as we rolled back to London, and I fancy that the journey was a short one to Colonel Ross, as well as to myself, as we listened to our companion's narrative of the events which had occurred at the Dartmoor training stables upon the Monday night, and the means by which he had unravelled them. "I confess," said he, "that any theories which I had formed from the newspaper reports were entirely erroneous, and yet there was indications there. Had they not been overlaid by other details which concealed their true import? I went to Devonshire with the conviction that Fitzroy Simpson was the true culprit, although of course I saw that the evidence against him was by no means complete. It was while I was in the carriage, just as we reached the trainer's house, that the immense significance of the curried mutton occurred to me. You may remember that I was distrait and remained sitting after you had all alighted. I was marvelling in my own mind how I could possibly have overlooked so obviously a clue. "I confess," said the colonel, "that even now I cannot see how it helps us." It was the first link in my chain of reasoning. Powdered opium is by no means tasteless. The flavor is not disagreeable, but it is perceptive. Were it mixed with any ordinary dish, the eater would have undoubtedly detected it, and would probably eat it no more. A curry was exactly the medium which would disguise this taste. By no possible supposition could this stranger, Fitzroy Simpson, have caused curry to be served in the trainer's family that night. It is surely too monstrous a coincidence to suppose that he happened to come along with powdered opium upon the very night when a dish happened to be served which would disguise the flavor. Ooh. That is unthinkable. Therefore, Simpson becomes eliminated from the case, and our attention centers upon Straker and his wife, the only two people who could have chosen curried mutton for supper that night. The opium was added after the dish was set aside for the stable boy, for the others had the same for supper with no ill effects. Which of them, then, had access to that dish without the maid seeing them? Before deciding that question I had grasped the significance of the silence of the dog, for one true inference invariably suggests others. The Simpson incident had shown me that a dog was kept in the stables, and yet, though someone had been in and had fetched out a horse, he had not barked enough to arouse the two lads in the loft. Obviously, the midnight visitor was someone whom the dog knew well. Excuse me. I was already convinced, or almost convinced, that John Straker went down to the stables in the dead of night and took out Silver Blaze. For what purpose? For a dishonest one, obviously, or why should he drag his own stable boy? And yet I was at a loss to know why. There have been cases before now where trainers have made sure of great sums of money by laying against their own horses through agents and then preventing them from winning by fraud. Sometimes it is a pulling jockey, sometimes it's some surer and subtler means. What was it here? I hoped that the contents of his pocket might help me to form a conclusion, and they did so. You could not have forgotten the singular knife which was found in the dead man's hand, a knife which certainly no sane man would choose for a weapon. It was, as Dr. Watson told us, a form of knife which is used for the most delicate operations known in surgery, and it was to be used for a delicate operation that night. You must know, with your wide experience of turf matters, Colonel Ross, that it is possible to make a slight nick upon the tendons of a horse's hams, and to do it subcourteously, so as to leave absolutely no trace. A horse so treated would develop a slight lameness, which would be put down to a strain in exercise or a touch of rheumatism, but never to foul play. "Villain! Scoundrel!" cried the colonel. We have here the explanation of why John Straker wished to take the horse out to the moor. So spirited a creature would have certainly roused the soundest of sleepers when it felt the prick of the knife. It was absolutely necessary to do it in the open air. "I have been blind!" cried the colonel. "Of course that was why he needed the candle and struck the match." "Undoubtedly. But in examining his belongings, I was fortunate enough to discover not only the method of the crime, but even its motives. As a man of the world, Colonel, you know that men do not carry other people's bills about in their pockets. We have most of us quite enough to do to settle our own. I at once concluded that Straker was leading a double life, and keeping a second establishment. The nature of the bill showed that there was a lady in the case, and one who had expensive tastes. Liberal as you are with your servants, one can hardly expect that they can buy 20-guinea walking dresses for their ladies. I questioned Mrs. Straker as to the dress without her knowing it, and having satisfied myself that it had never reached her, I made a note of the milliner's address, and felt that by calling there with Straker's photograph, I could easily dispose of the mythical Derbyshire. From that time on, all was plain. Straker had led out the horse to a hollow where his light would be invisible. Simpson in his flight had dropped his cravat, and Straker had picked it up with some idea, perhaps that he might use it in securing the horse's leg. Once in the hollow, he had got behind the horse, and had struck a light. But the creature, frightened at the sudden glare, and with the strange instinct of animals feeling that some mischief was intended, had lashed out, and the steel shoe had struck Straker full on the forehead. He had already, in spite of the rain, taken off his overcoat in order to do his delicate task, and so as he fell, his knife gashed his thigh. Do I make it clear? "Wonderful!" cried the colonel. "Wonderful! You might have been there." My final shot was, I confess, a very long one. It struck me that so astute a man as Straker would not undertake this delicate tendon nicking without a little practice. What could he practice on? My eyes fell upon the sheep, and I asked a question which, rather to my surprise, showed that my surmise was correct. "You have made it perfectly clear, Mr. Holmes." When I returned to London, I called upon the milliner, who had recognized Straker as an excellent customer, of the name of Derbyshire, who had a very dashing wife, with a strong partiality for expensive dresses. I have no doubt that this woman had plunged him over head and ears in debt, and so led him into this miserable plot. "You have explained all but one thing," cried the colonel. "Where was the horse?" "Ah, it bolted, and was cared for by one of your neighbors. We must have an amnesty in that direction, I think. This is Captain Junction, if I am not mistaken, and we shall be in Victoria in less than 10 minutes. If you care to smoke a cigar in our rooms, Colonel, I shall be happy to give you any other details which might interest you." And so ends the adventure of Silver Blaze. Well, I hope you enjoyed those little bit of mysteries. Silver Blaze is actually one of my favorite of the Holmes mysteries just because it's so unusual. After all, who would think for the murder to be the very thing they were seeking out? And if you think about it, though, it makes perfect sense after all. Well, I hope you all enjoyed these mysteries for the night. It's always wonderful. Oh, Julian, great story. Thank you so much. Thank you, Julian, for being here. Private Maverick, it was quite interesting. Oh, thank you, Private Maverick. Yes, I find it a very interesting mystery to read. Um, Julian bows deeply, of course. And yes, as Dr. Zadium said, congratulations to Firefly who guessed the killer. Firefly, yes, thank you. It is a lot to read two at once as well. Yes, it is a lot, but this is the funny thing. Reading it tonight, I find Doyle's writing style to be very readable. I am going to commit some blasphemy, but it's much more readable than even uh, Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens, what is his writing is. I mean, I can read Dickens, but yet he does have a tendency to go on and on and on and on quite a bit with some of his wordings. Um, it maybe in the future I will go back and read some more Sherlock Holmes mysteries. Oh, and yes, Dickens does tend to put more characters and more voices. Yes, Dickens was paid by the word. Technically, Doyle was too. I mean, he was writing these for magazine serialization, but I believe when he wrote them in the book, he did do some editing. Firefly, a lot of older works are like that. Yeah, way far back in the days, in the Victorian era, they this was the major form of entertainment was reading the magazines for their stories, and so you would see a lot of serialized stories. Holmes did create a new genre of detective fiction, and there are a lot of Victorian detective stories, which maybe in future I will not just read some Sherlock Holmes stories, I will read some of those stories as well. I mean, I would love to read you some Dr. Thorndyke, I'm trying to remember some of the names here. Some of the rivals of Sherlock Holmes, as they call them. There's one story in particular, The Problem of Cell 13. I would absolutely adore reading for you guys. You scholars, it is a wonderful piece of detective fiction and a wonderful piece of mystery. Julian 20, my favorites. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Firefly Alcott wrote that way as well. She seems to have been paid a set amount per story, though, if Little Women is correct. Yes, I believe if I recall, she was paid that way. She it does kind of reflect, especially towards the end of Little Women, where she was going through a hard time in her life, but she had to finish the story since she had been paid for it, and it does show in some of the writings. Um, so yes, I will be doing future reading streams. I am planning a reading stream in future, more reading streams. I will be doing detective fiction again and some more other fictions as well. Um, the next stream I will be doing, I will be giving you guys a little preview. Next stream I will be doing will be a gaming stream next Tuesday. I'll be playing Secret of Monkey Island Special Edition. So, a point and click adventure game. It's a classic. I really love the Monkey Island series, and I'm really hoping to share it with you guys. I'm s- no, I will not be going 5 hours again anytime in the near future, unless it is an event stream. I don't plan to go that long. I saw what happened to me that long, and I am not going to try and push myself that hard again. Um, However, for now, I think it is getting quite late in the evening. I am thankful for all you scholars to come. Remember, the door to the study is always open to visitors old and new. Thank you for coming and enjoying these stories with me. I will see you next time. Good night, good morning, goodbye, and farewell, scholars.